Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ті, хто води всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 886 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And of course, it is the Sunday night fundraiser night, the best night of the week. And also, we have tremendous news to cover today as well. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine, and once again, the news of the conflicts that are now arising inside of the Middle East. We have an absolutely, or an excessively, either word, which I was trying to use, high amount of news to cover tonight, not only within Ukraine itself, but also in the Middle East as well, as the situation has now gotten to an absolute fever pitch, as we are hearing reports of explosions from Lebanese border towns just across the Israeli-Lebanese border, and we are also seeing that Israeli forces are beginning to move in place at this very moment. But one thing I will say, many of y'all have come back from last night when we were talking about this. It does appear that the invasion will not be happening right now. It will most likely happen in several days or weeks. It will most likely happen within several weeks, to be entirely honest. But still, there is 6 more days to go until a full week has passed since the provocation that would lead to a ground invasion of Lebanon. But nevertheless, we have absolutely breaking news tonight. Starting in the Middle East with those reports of ground explosions, we were then able to hear that immediately afterwards, Israeli aircraft are apparently rocketing up the coast from Beirut and back down towards the area of the Israeli border, apparently trying to conduct reconnaissance or maybe even sorties into the area of Lebanon. We've also been able to hear that the Israelis have made an official statement to the Republic of France, or the Fourth Republic of France, that they will be conducting a massive aerial bombardment campaign throughout pretty much the entirety of Lebanon, especially some suburbs of Beirut, and they have advised that they need to notify the Lebanese governmental authorities and try and prepare for any eventualities that may come from Israeli airstrikes that are going to be soon to follow. The Israeli War Cabinet has also given approval to Benjamin Netanyahu to be able to conduct any forms of offensive actions deemed necessary against the nation of Lebanon. At the same time, Iran and the Republic of Turkey are both threatening armed military action against the state of Israel if they are to conduct a ground invasion of the nation of Lebanon. A very interesting development, considering that Turkey is a NATO country and a member of the NATO alliance, which we will begin into in greater detail on into the stream. Not only that, we were also able to hear of the Wagner slaughter and additional details that came out today that we were able to confirm inside of Mali, as 80 Wagner soldiers were wiped out yesterday, and apparently one of the largest pro-Russian propagandists has been killed in this attack, and not only that, the leader of the Wagner group after Prigozhin has also been killed in this attack as well. It was a major occurrence, and we also got proof that Ukrainian special forces were involved in this ambush attack on these Wagner forces in the very fringes of the country of Mali. At the exact same time, inside the United States, we've been able to hear that the U.S. is continuously trying to reach a diplomatic solution in between Hezbollah and the Israelis, although that appears to be to absolutely no avail at this point, and it seems as though Israel is very hell-bound on conducting a ground invasion into Lebanon or conducting very strong armed action against Hezbollah forces inside of the country. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, we've also been able to hear of a very successful Ukrainian drone strike that ended up knocking out a large oil refinery just south of Nizhny Novgorod in the area of Kistovo. We were also able to hear major news in St. Petersburg that the Navy Day parades were held. Apparently, the actual Navy segment of the Navy Day parade was canceled, and we also got to see a bunch of Russian sailors throwing up a salute that looked a lot like a Sieg Heil, but we'll be getting to that here in a little bit on the video footage. Meanwhile, inside of Ukraine itself, the Ukrainians are continuously conducting defensive actions in the area of Bakhmut and Avdiivka, and we can also see that they're continuing to try and conduct offensive actions against the Russian forces in the north, near to the village of Vovchansk. But we have an insanely high amount of news tonight. It is a wild night of news, especially with what's going on in the Middle East and the wild diplomatic developments that we've seen so far during the diplomatic maneuvers phase leading up to the actual war that has been going on at this moment. I'd also like to make a quick note, and I don't think I even have to say anything about this because apparently a lot of y'all already found it, that tonight is the Sunday night fundraiser, which is where we support a nonprofit helping out inside of Ukraine or helping to support Western interests around the world, much like we may see here in the near future if things are to change drastically inside the Middle East. Right now, the fundraiser has a goal of $3,000, and it is a fundraiser for Revive Soldiers of Ukraine. Right now, we are already halfway to the goal in 18 minutes since the stream has gone live. Absolutely crazy, and we love to see...
Tremendous, man. That's so fast. Like, that's faster than usual for certain.
I mean, it is really crazy. And I gotta say, a huge shout out to every single one of y'all who's supporting. Hopefully we can hit that $3,000 fundraiser goal here within the first half hour of the stream. But moving on from that news, it is now time for us to get down into the area of southern Lebanon and northern Israel, as we were able to hear, according to OSINT Defender, that there is reports of Israeli Air Force and artillery forces firing against the town of Tyre and several other communities in southwestern Lebanon on the border with Israel. From what we understand, a large amount of these artillery attacks by the Israelis are focalized within this specific area of Tyre. This is, from what we understand, on the very inclines of a valley that travels through this area, and this may be preparatory work for an Israeli offensive that will start to move through this area sometime soon. I've been trying to look over the past day at the areas and the terrain of southern Lebanon, and it is going to pose some difficulties for Israeli armored forces and the Israeli armed forces to advance through effectively. The area is incredibly mountainous, much like northern Israel is as well, and this does pose a decent amount of issues for those Israeli forces that will be trying to push forward from the areas around the town of Aitarun and up into the area of Kafar Sir, which is just a little bit south, well actually it's incredibly south of the Litani River, which is their main point of advance that they're going to be trying to reach. Nevertheless, we do understand that the Israeli armed forces are currently preparing at this moment to possibly make those advances into Lebanon. These artillery fires that we're hearing about, as well as air support missions, do appear to be trying to soften up possible Hezbollah strong points and positions, so that way when the Israelis begin their ground invasion, they will be able to march in and face very little opposition or a very uncoordinated force, and then isolate and destroy the Hezbollah forces in detail, which is a fairly normal battle strategy for most armed forces around the world, is to isolate enemy forces and then destroy each of them in detail. And what that really means, that sounds like a really cool military term, but what that really means is that if you had 10 guys in a room, instead of fighting all 10 guys at the same time, you know, which might be tough, you end up isolating each one, where it's pretty much a one-on-one fight, and you beat that one to a pulp, and then you move on to the next one. That's pretty much what defeat in detail means, and that's what the Israelis are most likely going to try and achieve against Hezbollah, although Hezbollah is not a conventional force, and they are an asymmetrical guerrilla force that doesn't really adhere to the realms of conventional warfare or the rules of conventional warfare. And for that reason, while the Israelis will most likely attempt to isolate and destroy Hezbollah in detail, that most likely will end up being somewhat difficult, meaning that this offensive may roll along quite slowly, especially whenever it makes it to an urban area like Tyre. We actually found out that this is not Tyre, this is actually pronounced Tyre. And so they probably will have to take their time through this area and slowly advance through Tyre until they make it into the southern banks of the Litani River. But nevertheless, we also were able to hear some very interesting news as well from the Israeli government and from the Israeli armed forces, that Israeli forces are beginning to move into pre-selected offensive positions. So we can see right here the transportation of a Merkava Mark III. This is a fairly older main battle tank of the Merkava series. Most Merkavas nowadays are either Merkava 3Ds or Merkava 4s of different variants, and there's actually a decent amount of Merkava 4 variants. But this video is showing an Israeli ground forces unit that is moving in with Merkava 3s. We can also see one Merkava 4 right up there. It looks like a Merkava 4M. But really quickly, I want to show y'all a Merkava because it's very important to understand, since we're having to revisit this again, what kind of arms and equipment the Israelis have at their disposal. This is a Merkava. Specifically, this is actually a Merkava Mark 4M, which is one of the most advanced and modernized versions of the Merkava main battle tank that has been in service for decades with the Israeli armed forces, although the original Merkava doesn't really look that similar to the modern day Merkava that you see here. The one that we were seeing in this video that was being transported up to the front lines was a Merkava Mark III. And that is this one. Actually, that is a Merkava Mark III with a side armor. I'm trying to see if I can find y'all one without the side armor so that way y'all can see the exact variant that I was talking about. And sadly, it looks as though they don't really have a lot of pictures of the older variants of the Merkava. That may have actually been a Merkava Mark II, but that would be pretty much next to impossible because the Merkava Mark IIs, at least in Israeli service, are fairly rare at this point, most of them having been upgraded either to Merkava Mark IIIs or Merkava Mark IVs of some sorts of variants. But let me see here really quickly. If that is anything, then that would be a Merkava Mark II. If it isn't going to have the armor layout of a Mark III, it is a Mark II. So let's see if I can find y'all a Merkava Mark II. And here we go. This is a Merkava Mark II. So this is probably the exact variant that was being carried on the back of that tractor trailer into northern Israel is the Merkava Mark II. We can actually see that the turret profile is exactly the same. It does not have the same kind of armor modifications that a Merkava Mark III or Mark IV has, and this suggests that this unit that is being moved into this area may be some sort of a reservist force that is used by the Israeli Defense Forces to pretty much create a screen in front of the main force. This lets us know that a ground invasion of Lebanon will most likely not be happening for some time at this point. Lighter forces like these, or less equipped forces, are usually put ahead of the main force wherever they're building up, and they provide what is called a screen or a cover. Considering that these are Merkava Mark IIs, this may actually be more of a cover than a screen. A screen is a armed unit inside of an armed force, and their entire job is to try and make limited contact with enemy forces and figure out their size and their main locations or main axes, and then relay that to the main force further behind them. From what we understand, when Merkava Mark II is involved in this situation, also considering that they're currently not waiting for a Hezbollah offensive, these forces are most likely going to be providing a cover. A cover is a different form of military, well, unit action, if you want to call it that, very similar to a screen, but the cover is actually supposed to defend the main force from possible counterattacks and hold their positions. Screens don't really have to hold their positions, they just have to constantly engage the enemy in small skirmishes and firefights to ascertain their size and also their force structure, but a cover is meant to stay in place and make sure to protect the main force from any sort of a devastating preemptive attack or any serious damage that could come from an enemy force. Going with the fact that this is a Merkava Mark II and we aren't seeing a large number of Merkava Mark IVs or Mark IIIs in this truck convoy here, we are assuming that this is most likely the beginning of the creation of an Israeli cover force in the area of the northern border as they continue to move more of their forces into the region and begin to build up the main offensive force, which will most likely start the primary offensive into Lebanon. Meaning, if we were to take a good assumption here, this primary offensive is probably still 2 to 3 weeks away if I was to take an assumption off of what we're seeing right now. It is not going to be instantaneous, that is for sure, and seeing that heavy equipment is moving into northern Israel, it also kind of ends the claim that the Israelis already had all of their armed forces built up onto the border and they were ready to cross today, because if that was the case, we would see that there would be no movements of any forces like this that appear to be some sort of a screen or a cover, because the main offensive force, the screen or the cover, would have already been in place in this area of the border and would have been ready to advance, which they clearly are not at the moment. Meanwhile, we did get to hear that an offensive most likely will be coming, and there were several large statements that were made today, not only by the Israelis, but by other nations as well, that is showing that everyone is largely fearing an imminent invasion of Lebanon by the state of Israel. We were able to hear that the War Cabinet, after convening today with Benjamin Netanyahu, said that the members of the cabinet have authorized the Prime Minister and Defense Minister Gallant to decide on the manner of the response against Hezbollah and the timing. This is something that is a very important thing to understand, as the War Cabinet's approval was necessary for Netanyahu to be able to issue the orders to the Israeli Defense Forces that they would begin their preparations and prepare to launch their ground offensive in Lebanon. Now that those orders have been issued, those Israeli military vehicles and units are now on their way into the area of the border, and they are now preparing for that offensive that will be coming on into the future. But the chain of command, we would also like to say this, the chain of command that we're seeing right now is the exact one that we laid out yesterday, because there was a very big discussion in between Matthew and me and all of y'all about when this ground offensive would begin. Would it begin by tomorrow, which by yesterday's metric is right now, or would it be a couple of weeks, maybe a week out or a couple of weeks out? I said it was most likely going to be a couple of weeks out, and I went through the reason why, and I said that Netanyahu would have to arrive back in Israel. He would then have to meet with the War Cabinet in person, talk over the situation, which could take hours. Then once the approval is orders given to Netanyahu for any actions to be taken that they deem necessary, they would then disseminate that information to the Minister of Defense, which is Gallant. The Gallant would then relay that information from the Ministry of Defense to the actual generals of the Israeli armed forces in the field. They would then disseminate that information down from the army level to either the corps. I'm not really sure what unit level the Israelis have next in line. Usually nowadays it goes straight from the army to the division, or straight from the army to the brigade in the Chinese model, and then from the brigade, actually, no, let me think. Yeah, it goes from the Ministry of Defense, pretty much, of China to the group armies, and then from the group armies to the combined arms army brigades, and then from there down to the battalions. But what do we got, Matthew?
And we just hit the goal. Let's go.
Damn, we just did it. Oh, my Lord. We actually,
what is it? Just about 28 minutes into the stream, we've already hit the goal, and we're $35 over it. And huge shout out to the donors tonight. That was very fast and tremendous to see.
I can't believe that. I mean, we hit that literally in less than 30 minutes. $3,000. That is killing it. I got to give a huge shout out to y'all tonight for getting that done and making that possible. That is absolutely unbelievable. But getting back into our news really quickly, and where I was at, which was talking about how the dissemination of orders is done, it goes from Netanyahu to the Israeli Minister of Defense, and from the Minister of Defense to the generals of the Israeli Defense Forces, and then from them, it most likely moves down either to the divisional level, if they still have a older Western battle structure, or if they have the newer Western battle structure, it moves straight from the army to the brigade, and then from the brigade to the battalion, and then from the battalion to the companies. And then that information is then sent all the way down, well, at least the pertinent parts, from the company to the platoons, and then from the platoons to the squads, and then from the squads to the fire teams. And then not only does it trickle down from the top all the way down to the bottom, the command orders, then the understanding of the orders has to trickle all the way back up the chain from the bottom to the very top. So all of the fire teams have to get together and with their squad leader and talk about the plan and let their squad leader know that they understand what's going to be happening, and the squad leader has to make sure that they understand the plan that is laid out for those specific fire teams on a very tactical level. Then the squad leaders report to their platoon leader and tell them that all of the squads and all the fire teams understand what they're doing and they're all on the same page with the platoon leader. Then all the platoon leaders in that one company get together and speak with the company commander. They make sure that the plan is put in place effectively. The company commander makes sure that all the platoons are ready to go. Then all of the company commanders meet with their battalion commander, and then they let them all know that everyone, every single fire team, every single squad, every single platoon, and every single company is on the same page, and they all understand what their part is and what they're going to be doing. And then finally, all of the battalion commanders then gather together with the brigade commander, and then they let the brigade commander know that they understand the plan, so on and so forth. It moves from the brigade either straight to the army level or to the division level, and then from the division up to the army, and then that's relayed back to the Minister of Defense, and then it's relayed back to Netanyahu, and then Netanyahu gives the order, and then it goes all the way back down the chain again, and then everyone goes. That's largely how this is going to work. We're seeing that quite clearly at this point, and so based off of that and knowing how military bureaucracy or the chain of command works and how slow and monolithic of a force that is, we will not be seeing the ground invasion probably for quite some time, most likely at least a few weeks. I would say 2 weeks, or maybe 3 at the longest. But with that, we are now going to be moving on into another very concerning bit of news that lets us know that something major will be happening, as we did get to hear that a warning of impending strikes was issued by the State of Israel, interestingly enough, to France. According to what we have, the Israeli government has notified France that they intend to launch a series of significant and broad strikes against Hezbollah targets in the suburbs of Beirut, as well as sites of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Quds forces in both northern Lebanon and Syria. This is actually letting us know that this strike campaign is not only trying to attack Hezbollah, it's also trying to attack their primary handlers, which are the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps forces that are actually based within the areas of northern Lebanon and also within the areas of western Syria under the Assad regime's control. This is a very interesting thing as well, as it is showing that the Israelis already have a plan to neutralize and disable the logistics centers of the Hezbollah forces and to make sure that they can no longer get any further support or any substantial support from Iran through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is incredibly interesting to hear, and once again showing us that a larger battle plan is being laid out at this moment, even according to what the Israelis are very rarely stating publicly to other countries like France. Meanwhile, inside of Beirut, we also got to hear that there was a large amount of GPS spoofing that is now appearing inside of the area of the Eastern Mediterranean. According to what OSINT Defender reported, GPS interference and spoofing right now over the Eastern Mediterranean is extremely significant and has been off and on for several months. This is why some commercial flights on Flight Radar 24 and other tracking software may show them in Beirut when they should be in Tel Aviv or even Cyprus. We believe the spoofing and jamming is being conducted to try and make things a little bit more difficult either for the Israeli Air Force or for Hezbollah to be able to conduct and plan attacks inside of Israel if they have any form of guided munitions, which should be highly unlikely or very rare. Moving on from that news and into Beirut once again, we were also able to hear that international flights in and out of southern Lebanon are being canceled. Actually, out of Beirut airport are being canceled, as there are reports of Israeli strikes inside of southern Lebanon, and a full-on conflict most likely will be beginning here very shortly. So this is once again showing us that an armed conflict is coming around the corner. Well, actually, it's kind of already begun as of today with the reports of artillery and airstrikes being used within the area of the southern border. These do appear to be preliminary actions to try and soften up the Hezbollah forces, or to at least conduct enough fires to be able to find out where their main forces are and then direct overwhelming firepower at those positions so that way they can wipe them out and make room for the major ground offensive that will be coming here within a while. We also got to hear some very wild statements made by other countries within the region. And we're going to, of course, move to the big daddy, the one who's actually supporting the main proxy forces within Lebanon and also within the Gaza Strip, which is Iran. And we were able to hear that the Islamic Republic of Iran is, of course, warning of consequences of the Israeli attacks on Lebanon after the Golan strike in the Golan Heights, which was on Machat Shams. But nevertheless, we are seeing that the Iranians are once again warning of some form of consequences. If those consequences are similar to what they were in the past, which is a large drone and missile strike, we have a feeling that that will most likely be marginal in impact or completely insignificant in the amount of losses or damage that it conducts to the state of Israel. However, there is another player in this area that is now stepping in and threatening direct military action against the state of Israel. This is one that people are probably expecting, because we have said a certain phrase about this country time and time again on this channel. It is something that we have to say it's not unexpected. And I know that many of y'all, when I say the name of this country, are going to be like, well, of course that would be expected, because they do what they do. And a lot of people know exactly the phrase I'm talking about at this point. But they're threatening to do what they do, which is turkey things, because they believe that Israel is actually going to be conducting a ground invasion into Lebanon. And that really begs the question, is Israel going to conduct a massive air campaign into Lebanon, or are they going to conduct a large ground invasion into Lebanon, seeking to reach the southern banks of the Litani River? And a lot of people have been throwing in a lot of different comments and opinions on what they believe will end up happening as a result of this attack that occurred on Machat Shams in the Golan Heights just yesterday. And a lot of people are saying that it may be a major ground invasion. Others are saying that it'll be large missile strikes. Some people are saying that it'll be targeted assassinations, and some are undecided. But Matthew, what are people saying, and what are you thinking about this? Do you think it'll be a major ground invasion, or do you think it'll be larger missile strikes and airstrikes that are conducted within Lebanon?
All right, so after we heard today that the Israeli War Cabinet met and approved a quote-unquote severe response to Hezbollah forces in Lebanon, the question is, what will it look like? 48% said a major ground invasion, while 36% said large missile strikes, and 8% said targeted assassinations. And for me personally, I would still go with the major ground invasion. I believe that will happen eventually, and obviously the 24-hour time period has closed now, so it's beyond that period. So they did not do it within 24 hours like many U.S. analysts were expecting, and once again, that goes to show it's really hard to crystal ball anything in the Middle East because things are very unpredictable. Anything could happen, and it's just our educated guesses, so it is what it is. So I'm still with the 47%. I think the major ground invasion is probably still within our future here, and I really don't see see simply Israel remaining with large missile strikes. I don't think they're going to remain limited to that. I think they will go in on the ground because really the large missile strikes are not the best way to take out the terrorists, and they really have to go in to actually find them to actually get them. So I think they're left with the ground invasion. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, in my opinion, I don't know why I'm coughing so much tonight. I'm trying so hard not to cough on air, but I would have to say that I do believe, based off of what we're seeing right now, there most likely will be a large ground invasion of southern Lebanon that probably, at least in the early phase of this conflict, will be limited to the area south of the Litani. I have to make that very clear because a lot of people believe that when Israel is going to invade Lebanon, they're immediately going to invade from the south and travel all the way north through the country, pretty much into the area of Tripoli, and then stop there. That is not going to be the case. There is an area by UN resolution that Hezbollah is supposed to exist and conduct their operations from, and it's going to be that area only, which is the areas south of the Litani River. And let me go try and get y'all a map of the Litani River so that way y'all can see where this area actually is. And so let me see if there's an actual map of the Litani. The Litani River is incredibly small, by the way. Like, I'll show you all that eventually, but let's see here. Here it is. This is the Litani River. And you can actually see right here is the source of the Litani, which is up in the area kind of northern Lebanon. But everything south of the Litani, literally everything, is where Hezbollah can operate and manage their forces from, at least according to UN resolution. And so that means that this entire large area down here will most likely be where we see the major ground offensives by the Israelis, because this area from Tyre all the way over to the Israeli town of Metula right here, from east to west, everything south of that is largely where most most Hezbollah armed actions are being conducted at this moment against the state of Israel. This means that this probably will be the very first target of an Israeli ground offensive, and then we'll see that Israeli forces will attempt to push north and forwards into the remainder of the areas controlled by Hezbollah, south of the Litani River, most likely stopping around the area of Anjar, and then once Hezbollah starts to move further north than that, we probably will see in a month or two's time after the advance onto the Litani River that there would be another offensive expanding the scope and operations of the Israeli ground forces within the direction of Lebanon. So at the moment, I would have to say that I do believe it's going to be a fairly large ground invasion that we're going to be seeing moving on into the future. However, at least for the moment, I would largely have to say that it's going to be massive airstrikes and bombing campaigns that are conducted by the Israelis. It's going to be a little bit confusing because we're saying that a ground invasion is coming, but y'all are going to be seeing airstrikes probably for the next few days, if not weeks, in preparation for that ground offensive. So at least initially, it will look like we were incorrect in that the Israelis are not planning on conducting a ground invasion. They're only planning on conducting a major air campaign. But at this point, we have a fairly good reason to assume that the massive air campaign will most likely be a preparation for a ground offensive into the areas south of the Litani River. And so with that, I hope that does address at least what I'm assuming will happen fairly well. And considering that it was accurate for the last 24 hours, I'm hoping that it's going to be accurate for the next few weeks, or at least how that's largely going to turn out. But we can only wait and see how that will actually unfold. But moving on from that little bit of news and on into the actual country that is a bit of a shocker, but a little bit expected, the Republic of Turkey has made a statement today where they are threatening that they will go to war with Israel if Israel invades southern Lebanon with the intent of destroying Hezbollah. That statement was made today by none other than Erdogan, the Turkish president. And this is the actual video right here where he made this statement. I'll read y'all what he actually said in paraphrasing here in a second.
Biz nasıl Karabağ'a girdiysek, nasıl biz Libya'ya girdiysek, bunun benzerini aynen onlara da yaparız.
Now, that looks like a very interesting crowd, but nevertheless, Turkish President Erdogan threatened Israel with an invasion, and the reason why we know he threatened them with an invasion is because he said today that his troops would enter Israel just as they entered Karabakh and Libya. And if y'all don't know, Turkish forces actually entered the area of Nagorno-Karabakh a while ago and ended up conducting armed actions in that area. Funnily enough, the Turks almost got beat in that conflict, and some people actually argue that they were defeated in that conflict, which is a little interesting. Turkish armed forces were also involved in some military actions in Libya, and also, while this was not mentioned, Turkey was also involved in an invasion of Cyprus, which has left the island of Cyprus completely split in terms of who is running what part of Cyprus to this day, with the actual Republic of Cyprus controlling the southern side, or more so the western side of the island, while the Turkish-backed Republic of Cyprus runs the northern side. And funnily enough, their capital, Nicosia, is actually split in two, with the I guess you could call it the front line literally running through the city streets in between the two sides. And you can see that very interestingly, because the area in between the borders, in some places, like right here, it's still completely destroyed because no one's actually allowed to enter the neutral zone and try and rebuild the buildings that were damaged in the bombings that occurred all the way back in the 70s when Turkey invaded the area and the Battle of Nicosia took place. We can actually not drop down either on Street View to see this area because no one's allowed into the neutral zone. It's administered by the United Nations. But let me see here if I can show y'all the ruins that exist, and we actually can't. But you can see that people are still talking about one Cyprus because the Republic of Cyprus still wants the other half of their country that is technically illegally being controlled by a Turkish-led government within that area. But nevertheless, it does seem as though Turkey is now threatening to begin an armed conflict with Israel in support of Hezbollah inside of Lebanon. Now, many people know that this channel is pro-Western through and through, and I have to make that very clear with this idea because this is what follows. Turkey is openly supporting and attempting to protect a Iranian-backed proxy force within the area of southern Lebanon. Hezbollah is by no means, by no doubt, no misjudgment of the situation. It is anti-Western, anti-American by every single measure. This is a major concern this group causes within this area of the eastern, well, actually the western Arabian Peninsula, and for that reason, it is within Western interest for Israel to engage Hezbollah and to attempt to destroy them, or at least greatly limit their abilities for the next 10 to 20 years, much like they have done in the past. However, Turkey is now stepping forward and openly posing a massive issue to Israel dealing with this incredibly anti-Western force, and they are now trying to use a form of coercion against Israel to stop them from invading Lebanon because they want to levy the fear that Israel may have to end up fighting Turkey if they did such a thing. This is an inherently anti-Western action by Turkey, whether they mean it or not. Turkey does Turkey things, but Turkey is taking Turkey things a little bit too far, in my honest opinion. The United States should leverage the arms sales that we are still conducting to Turkey at this moment and threaten to cut off any further arms shipments, any further armed acquisitions projects, and also any further requests and requisitions of spare parts and supplies to keep their Western military equipment running in Turkey until they relent from this position. This is against the interests of the Western sphere, and Turkey being a member of the Western sphere, they should understand better than to go against the interests at large of the combined West. This is a bad idea. This is a bad decision by the Republic of Turkey, and if I was the President of the United States, there would be a very clear red line laid out quite publicly and openly at this moment that if Turkey does not back off and relent from that position, Turkey can move forward on its own very early on, and we will start to treat Turkey as a possible aggressor nation within the area and operating against our interests. We already have a very clear claim to this inside of Syria, as Syria did conduct an invasion of eastern Syria, currently controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces, fighting them and further weakening them in this offensive to try and create a security perimeter in this area. Turkey also, by the way, to give full disclaimer, also did this in the area controlled by Bashar al-Assad as well, but this was inherently anti-Western at its core when that was conducted by Turkey at the time, as they were fighting a Western-aligned group within Syria while also fighting the Assad regime directly as well, which was inherently an anti-Western objective, or more so in action. Now we're seeing that they're doing the same thing against Israel, and I would have to say the buck stops here. We are not going to allow Turkey to end up creating their own mini-sphere at the expense of collective Western interests, and so, in my honest opinion, I believe that the West should treat this with open hostility against the Republic of Turkey and start to openly threaten possible actions or sanctions or reprimands against the Republic of Turkey for this very foolish and foolhardy idea or assertion that they have made today. But nevertheless, a lot of people have thrown in opinions on Turkey threatening to invade Israel if the attacks were launched into Lebanon. And a lot of people have already thrown in their thoughts on this. And a lot of people actually say that Turkey is just running their mouths, which you would believe that, but we'll actually get to that in a minute. That's kind of the reason of the poll, is to see what everyone's thinking. But a lot of people are also saying Turkey might actually make a move against Israel, which would be a major development in the area. Others are saying that they're unsure and undecided, and some are saying maybe they were just simply misunderstood. Maybe they didn't mean they were going to fight Israel. Maybe they just meant they were going to send their armed forces somewhere around Israel and just stare at them, or something along those lines. But nevertheless, Matthew, what are people thinking, and what are you thinking about this?
All right, so 68% of the audience. I mean, that was pretty abrupt right there. I was like, "What's going on?" But anyways,
on a cliffhanger, man. Sorry, go ahead.
So about 68% of the audience said Turkey is just yapping once again, while 21% said Turkey might move on Israel, and 4% said, maybe they were misunderstood. And on this one, I honestly have no worries whatsoever about this. Turkey is a country that rides the fence. They are a certified turkey yapper, also known as a mumble yapper, and that's all they do. They don't really take action. They don't really do anything. They simply run their mouth, yap, and say they're going to do this, and that, and it never happens. It never, ever happens. And while Turkey's espoused many anti-Western sentiments over the years, now that Erdogan's in charge, none of it's ever come to fruition. And Turkey is a NATO country, and they derive a lot of benefit from being a NATO member, and they don't actually want to risk that. So what I think is happening here is Erdogan is trying to play to his domestic political audience by making these statements and trying to appeal to a certain group in Turkey to get their votes. But in actuality, the actual thing behind the scenes is much different, and Erdogan really doesn't want to do any of these things, including invading Israel, because Israel would grease Turkey because they have nuclear weapons if anything like this happened. And also Turkey would find themselves alone in the world because the West would abandon them at that point. So it's just pure yapping, and I have no concern about this whatsoever. Now, obviously, this is not in the spirit of diplomacy, and Erdogan really should tamp this down because even though he's trying to get votes, I get that as part of being a politician. This is really stupid talk to talk badly about your allies. That is really stupid on pretty much every level, and why he's doing it is just up for debate. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, like I was saying a moment ago, that this is a very stupid move by Turkey. I will say this, whether they're meaning this seriously or whether he's just saying this to try and secure votes, it is starting to show that Turkey is moving in a direction that is not conducive to Western interests. And while the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles may be a strategically important corridor for NATO to be able to have control over through Turkey to be able to stop the Russian Black Sea Fleet from sailing out into the Mediterranean during wartime, I do not believe that Turkey is that strategic of a member that they should be allowed to do things that are inherently anti-Western like this and get away with it. I want to make this very clear. A lot of people kind of get tied up into this argument, which is a very Israeli-Palestinian-centric argument about who controls the land in Israel, whether it's the Palestinians or whether it's the Israelis. That is pretty much a removed topic for the Western world. It doesn't really matter who actually controls that land. It matters which side is pro-Western and which side is anti-Western. And that's really the argument that a lot of people should be focusing on in America, and I don't really know why a lot of people in America who are not actual Israelis or Palestinians largely care about the fine details of who owns the land or who controls it according to their own arguments or their own beliefs. The reality is, one side, which is supported by Iran, wants to see Americans dead, they want to see American influence completely wiped out in the area of the Middle East, and they want Americans to suffer. That is quite obvious. I will say, if you disagree with that, why don't you go over there and see if that's the case. They will beat you to death in the streets because you're an American. I will bet you money on that one that they would. And so it doesn't make any sense to argue, well, maybe the Palestinians should have the land, and Palestine should be free, because they're going to beat you to death after they get that land, and then you're not really going to be getting anything. You will have given the land away that was pretty much managed and operated by Israel, and you'll also be beaten to death as well. So, not really a good end result there. Israel is openly pro-Western, much like many of the other countries nearby, like Jordan and Saudi Arabia. They are open to supporting Western interests and American interests within this region, which is a very important thing. And so, going off of that, anyone who threatens a Western aligned country within this region is anti-Western. And Iran's proxies through Hamas and Hezbollah are supporting and operating anti-Western operations. This means that when Israel deals with them, it's not a question of, do we like the idea of Israel fighting Palestinians or Israel fighting Hezbollah? It's more so of a question, do we want America's enemies to prevail and possibly triumph over American interests, or do we want them to fail? And I think that everyone would be largely of the joint agreement, we would want them to fail every time. So we want Israel to go out there, and we want them to start crushing folks like Hamas and Hezbollah. That would be something that the United States would need to see, and it would be a positive outcome not just for Israel for their own reasons, which the Israeli argument is a part of, but for Western reasons in their defeating anti-Western forces. Turkey is a part of the Western sphere. That is obvious. They are a part of a EU customs union. They're not an actual part of the European Union, but they do have a special agreement with the European Union to be able to conduct trade with them with certain kinds of tariffs and protections in place. They also are a member full-on of NATO, and were one of the first members inside of the NATO alliance. However, if they're going to start conducting actions that are against the West's interests, not only in the area of the Middle East, but also really just in general, are they really a Western country? And should they be able to continue these kinds of actions? I would say clearly not. And I would say that we need to leverage our ability as the United States, and I believe that the entire Western world should leverage their ability to tell Erdogan, these statements are stupid. We don't care what you're making them for, whether you're making them to get reelected or whether you're making them to actually mean it. You're going to shut your mouth, you're going to do nothing, or otherwise you can count on no further arms shipments, no further arms support, and you can do whatever the hell you want. But it's not going to be with NATO, and it's not going to be with the collective West behind you. And then I'll say this as well as a caveat, because some people are going to say, well, wouldn't that start to push the Turks towards the Russians? Probably not, because they're trying to still create their own miniature sphere of influence within the area, trying to kind of create a brand new Ottoman Empire without having to conquer the lands around them. But if for some reason they ever did start to move a little bit too close to the Chinese or the Russians, there can of course be a very unfortunate but necessary governmental change inside of Turkey to bring back the Republic of Turkey of old that actually joined the NATO alliance way back in the early 50s. That would be the way I would look at this at the moment. I would say that this is something that we should not allow in the Western world, because allowing people to constantly go out and pretty much carve their own sphere with their own interests in the Western world is going to degrade the West, because there won't be a single unified message or a single unified leadership of an individual country in the sphere any longer if we do not step forward anymore and put our foot down on inherently anti-Western actions like Turkey is conducting right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And meanwhile, while Erdogan is largely threatening some sort of armed action against Israel for their possible invasion of Lebanon, we were able to hear that in Washington, D.C., the United States is still seeking a diplomatic solution. And this is what they had to say today. We have been in continuous discussions with Israeli and Lebanese counterparts since the horrific attack yesterday in northern Israel that killed a number of children playing soccer. This attack was conducted by Lebanese Hezbollah forces. It was their rocket and launched from an area they control. It should be universally condemned. Hezbollah started firing on Israel on October 8th, claiming solidarity with Hamas, another Iranian-backed terrorist group. Our support for Israel's security is ironclad and unwavering against all Iranian-backed threats, including Hezbollah. The United States is also working on a diplomatic solution along the blue line that will end all attacks once and for all, and allow citizens of both sides of the border to safely return to their homes. That is so sweet.
The good old diplomacy strategy with terrorists. That always works every time. Negotiating with terrorists, that seems like something that at one point in history, we said we would never do that. But now we're trying to negotiate with them. And, you know, when you try to do that, it never goes well because they don't negotiate in good faith, because that's the whole point of their existence, is to cause terror. So if they're going to just give up the whole title of being a terrorist, then they might be diplomats. But, you know, they're terrorists. It's literally in the name. They're not giving that up.
But Matthew, there is nothing that can beat the power of friendship, Matthew. If we just talk it out and we just all
Oh,
say,
yeah.
why don't we just all get along, and start playing the song, Why Can't We Be Friends? It'll all be over. I mean, it'll be done. And of course, Israel and Hezbollah, they're just overreacting a little bit to this whole thing. I'm sure that more negotiations, like the ones that we've been having going on for almost a year at this point, I'm sure it will finally bring an end to these hostilities once and for all, and peace will return to these wonderful and picturesque landscapes.
You know what happens when you try to talk diplomacy with terrorists? What happens is, because they're very cunning people, that's the whole point of them, is to cause terror, obviously, is they simply use diplomacy as a way to manipulate the other side. They'll try to use the diplomacy to try to string people along to sort of buy time so that way they can rearm themselves, and they'll try to convince other people, oh, look, we have your good interest at heart, and if you just do this, or you give us this concession and help us out, then we'll be all good and okay. And sure enough, every single time, they always back out of it. They end up attacking and backing out of their word. So it's just a way for the terrorists to get a foothold over our good allies here. So it's never really a good idea to do that because they're dishonest. And the only way to deal with them is to go in there and literally force them to stop doing what they're doing. That's the only way. And Israel knows that, but yet we still won't stand behind Israel all the way, even though we're saying that we're trying to stand behind them. Because if we really were, we would tell Israel, we stand behind you 100%, go into Lebanon, do what you got to do, and if someone stands in the way of that, then they're going to be picking a fight with us as well. That should be what we're saying, in my opinion.
And I gotta say that it is just incredibly aggravating. Also, Matthew, for some reason, I saw that a lot of people actually got a kick out of you singing "Why Can't We Be Friends," and I actually saw some people saying those notes aren't easy to hit. They kind of were. Like, I was like, that's weird that people actually are impressed with that a little bit, because usually when I sing, people are like, oh God, please stop. And that was like the first time I've ever seen anyone take a slightly positive reaction to that, so that's shocking. But moving on from that, which was something that distracted me, actually, I was like, what? I was like, I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting people to get a laugh out of that, or kind of cringe at it a little bit and then get a laugh out of it. But beyond that, I would say this is what I would do as follows as the President of the United States in this given situation. Now, I will say this. I do not think, and I want to make sure to make this as a fairly good critique, because some people are going to be saying, well, you're saying what you would do as president. Isn't this kind of delving into politics? On a non-political level, making sure to critique both sides equally, I don't think that either side at this moment in America would end up taking this course of action. However, this is the course of action that I'm going to be taking if I was president of the United States. One, we would give, like has already been given, the approval for Israel to conduct any actions. In fact, I would actually encourage them to start a invasion of southern Lebanon to try and deal with Hezbollah once and for all. And I would also offer them any further, I guess you could say, intelligence support that would be necessary, much like we're giving to Ukraine, for them to be able to try and figure out exactly where Hezbollah forces are I guess you could say, coalesce the most in the southern region, and to be able to strike those areas effectively, and also try and mitigate any form of collateral damage that may be had, both in civilian and property damage. Another thing that I would also do is I would send a carrier group to the area around the Gulf of Oman, or really towards the area of the Arabian Sea. That aircraft carrier and its fleet would serve as a warning to Iran that any actions in provocation against Israel will be met with strong force. We may even want to possibly start buzzing Iranian vessels that may be in the Persian Gulf to try and send that message and let them know that we mean business. Another thing that I would start to do is already, on the earlier part, start to have the United States Air Force conduct air operations against the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and other Iranian-backed forces within the areas of Syria and Iraq to try and knock out their abilities to supply Hezbollah, to make the way a lot easier for Israel to begin their ground invasion and know that there won't be any further supplies or possible reinforcements brought in by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to support Hezbollah. I would also make it very clear that the United States is not going to allow any other possible foreign intervention, by warning the Turks that if they get involved at all, we are cutting off all arms shipments and any further supply shipments to Turkey to keep their armed forces running. And so it's best for them to stay out if they want to have a running armed force in the next few years. We will also make sure to send a message to the Russian Federation that we are conducting these actions, and any attempt by the Russian Federation to move forces into Syria to try and start to conduct actions against Israel or any air operations against Israel will be met with incredibly strong force, and we will not be allowing any Russian bombers or any Russian aircraft to conduct hostile actions in support of Iran's proxies against the state of Israel. At that moment, the Russians' hands are also tied, because while people say the Russians are fairly aggressive, if we go and get the aggressive foot off first, they're going to be on the back foot, and they're not going to be able to conduct the kind of operations they would want to, because they would risk a possible confrontation with the United States, which if we play it strongly, like I'm suggesting, they are going to avoid that, because they do not want to go to war with America. That will be a losing war. They do not want to go to war with NATO as a whole, because that will be a losing war. With all of these things in place, Israel can begin their ground invasion of southern Lebanon, hopefully wipe out a large amount of Hezbollah. They'll never be able to completely eliminate Hezbollah. They will eventually regrow and come back, but it won't be for about 10 to 20 years, meaning that the situation will stabilize for about another 10 to 20 years. If we really wanted to stabilize the situation, we'd just go straight for the source. We could end up trying to attempt an overthrow of the Iranian government, and largely a lot of our ailments and troubles, at least of the current form, would end. Of course, there could be unprecedented or unpredictable results coming out of that, possibly the formation of new radical terrorist groups within the region, but that is something that we just have to take as an unpredictable outcome, and we can't really gauge with a fair amount of certainty. But I hope that does address that the best I can. Go ahead.
One more thing that I wonder about the current state of the way we deal with the Middle East as the United States and our foreign policy is I wonder if there even is a red line anymore, because I'm beginning to wonder, with all the ways that we're letting people get away with whatever they want to do, like, for example, this very heinous attack on Majdal Shams in Israel that killed children, that apparently didn't cross the red line. So I'm beginning to wonder where even is the red line, because what do the terrorists have to do for the United States to eventually say, we need to go take these people out, because they're not going to stop, and nothing we're saying in our diplomatic talk is going to stop them from doing anything that they're doing right here. So is there even a red line anymore? I'm beginning to wonder.
That's the big thing. It's like, it doesn't really look like, as far as our policies are concerned, that we have a red line. It hasn't really looked like that, to be honest, for quite some time, to me at least, because we didn't take, like for example, during the Syrian civil war, we didn't take strong action to crush Assad before the Russians got involved. You know, because the Russians were involved in that war for about a year and a half. And during that year and a half, we could have stepped in first, supported the SDF, and completely overthrown the Assad regime and had a democratically aligned Syria. Now, at the time, that may have not been a likely option, at least for the American government at the time, because still U.S. forces were withdrawing from Iraq when the Arab Spring happened and Syria devolved into a civil war, and at the same time there was a large amount of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and both of those were still fairly unpopular even back then, before the withdrawal of Afghanistan during 2021. So that may have been the reason why we didn't get heavily involved and immediately get active in the Syrian civil war to try and support the SDF forces in any large form and crush the Assad regime, because if we had crushed the Assad regime and we had brought forward the SDF as the actual government of the Republic of Syria, we would have seen the following picture instead of the one we see today. A Western-aligned Syria, a Western-friendly Iraq, a Western-aligned Jordan, a Western-aligned Syria, a Western-aligned Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Oman. Pretty much the entire Arabian Peninsula would have been Western-aligned or Western-friendly, except for Iran and except for the Hezbollah forces in Lebanon and the Hamas forces in the Gaza Strip. We would have pretty much cut off, at least technically, any real way for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to have any friendly aligned groups for them to make it from Syria into Lebanon and to support Hezbollah in any large form. We could have probably avoided any kind of hostile actions by Hezbollah because they would have never had the backing, the funding, or the support from the Iranians to be able to ever pull off any stunts like this if we had just dealt with the Assad regime back when the civil war began inside of Syria. But nevertheless, for the entire time that we have been in the Middle East, we get involved just enough, but we never get involved enough to actually fix the situation. So we get just involved enough to be in it, but we never get involved enough to finish it and actually have a Western-aligned Arabian Peninsula like there needs to be, at least in my opinion.
The reason why I ask about the red line is because the way the U.S. is approaching this right now, and by the way, I'm talking purely about foreign policy. I'm not getting into domestic politics, so let's don't delve into that. But the way we're approaching this is like we're going to be able to reason our way out of this. Like we can reason with terrorists and reason with countries that have religious differences that are so deep with the Israeli people that it's literally centuries long that this has been building up. And the United States acts like we're going to reason and talk our way out of the situation and to talk down the religious differences over centuries that have built up. And that is never going to happen. It's obvious that's never going to happen. So the only way to deal with it is to either stand behind Israel 100% and let them do what they need to do to rid themselves of this threat from Hezbollah and also the Iranian proxies, or we're going to sit back and let Israel continuously get hit by these proxies, and they're eventually going to get hit harder, where even their systems and also their air defenses might get overwhelmed, and there might actually be Israeli casualties, and also perhaps a breaking in the Israel defenses. So I'm not sure what the strategy is at the moment, because there appears to really not be one, if I'm being perfectly honest here, because you're not going to talk your way out of this. It's simply not going to happen.
I would have to agree with that. There is no talking out of this at this point, and there's certainly no talking out of it when the nation we're really talking to through Hezbollah and Hamas is Iran. And Iran has made it very clear over the past 40 years since the founding of the, well, really at this point, yeah, it's like 45 years nearly, since the founding of the Islamic Republic of Iran, they have made it very clear that they want America dead. They want everyone in America dead. They want America to be an insignificant country, and they want to completely rid any kind of Western influence from the entirety of the Middle East. That is something that they have made wildly clear the entire time. So it does not matter if we are able to come to an agreement with Hezbollah, because the real one running the show is Iran, and they have made it very clear that they're never going to compromise on an anti-Western, anti-American stance, which means that this is never going to end. So that's largely the take we have to have at this point. If we want anything to really change in the Middle East, we need strong action. We don't, and I'm not saying strong action is in loud mouthing or sitting there and saying we would love to see some diplomacy up in here. I'm not talking about either of those approaches. I'm talking about some actual hardcore action to be involved in this area. I'm saying we need to go in. Whether it takes a lot of effort and whether it takes a good amount of time, we need to go in and we need to deal with the situation. None of this would be happening right now if we had crushed the Islamic Republic of Iran when it was attempting to rise and overthrow the Shah. This wouldn't be happening in the current situation right now if we had supported the SDF forces against Assad and actually crushed the Assad regime and brought forward a democratic Republic of Syria, not like a communist version of that, but you'll get what I'm saying. If we had done these things and we had actually been a lot more assertive in the Middle East than we have been, we would see a much better Middle East, a lot more stable of a Middle East today than we do right now. That is my belief.
Also,
entirely.
stop sending Iran money. That would help too.
A lot of things would help based off of what we've done versus what we haven't done. And also, instead of trying to sit there, because this is one thing that I found very bizarre, everyone in America, okay, this is a fair critique right here. Everyone in America knows that the Iranians are conducting some sort of research with nuclear technology. We do not know whether that's for peaceful means or means of war. And we already know that it's obviously for means of war. They're a very hostile nation, so it's going to be in the eventuality of producing a nuclear weapon. And then one group went, you know what, let's try and make a treaty with them where they'll try and develop their nuclear technology for only peaceful means, because they'd never, just because we wrote this down on paper, try and create a nuclear weapon. And then the other side went, let's back out of that treaty and just let them do whatever the hell they want, pretty much. But at the same time, we're actually not going to do anything to stop them from producing a nuclear weapon or really impede those efforts at all either. That was kind of like those two approaches literally do the same thing. It's either let's pretend like we have a slight involvement in stopping them from making a nuclear weapon, although they will still make a nuclear weapon, and then the other side went, let's act like we just don't like them working with nuclear technology at all, but let's not take any real steps to stop them from producing a nuclear weapon. That was both approaches, and they both end up with Iran getting a nuclear weapon at the end of this whole ordeal. Once we heard that Iran actually had usable nuclear research facilities, which we have known for years now, and even Iran has publicly said that they have them in Isfahan, we should have immediately started to conduct some form of intervention in this area to either dismantle that weapons of mass destruction program or to dismantle the incredibly hostile, dangerous, and unstable Islamic Iranian Republic's government and bring forward one that would be a lot more stable and wouldn't be attempting to create nuclear weapons. That would be my approach. I think that would be the best one. And yes, it would mean that the United States would be involved in some sort of a conflict in the Middle East. I know a lot of people don't really like that. A lot of people don't like conflict at all. But sometimes conflict is necessary. And in moments like these, conflict is a necessity of life. Otherwise, we're going to be dealing with a much worse situation here in America in the future than we are right now. Because it already concerns Americans that a rogue state like North Korea has nuclear weapons. Now we're going to have to deal with a second rogue state like Iran, which is even on a governmental level more unstable than North Korea. Because I'll tell you this, North Korea might give arms in the black market to questionable groups around the world, but I don't see North Korea actually funding and sponsoring specific terrorist groups to conduct attacks against America. They're unstable, but they're not that unstable. Iran is so unstable, they will actually fund and support terrorist groups that will attack the United States. So imagine how unstable that government's going to be if they get a nuclear weapon. They're going to be even more unstable than North Korea.
Oh, and also, by the way, I saw Ron Burrell Jr. saying in the live chat right here. He said, I understand where y'all are coming from, but my fear is that we might get into another Middle East quagmire. And that is a huge concern as well. Nobody wants to go back to the Middle East and get into a forever war again. Nobody wants that in the United States. I can guarantee you that, unless you're, invested in maybe a defense company or something like that. But, we should simply stand behind Israel and let them do the dirty work. This is their region of the world, and they are basically our actor in that region of the world. So this is our chance, basically like we're doing in Ukraine. We're telling Ukraine, we're going to give you all the weapons you need to defend your country. You're going to save your people, and plus, you're going to put a buffer in between us and Russia and make sure that they can't go any further. That's what we're doing with Ukraine, and we should do the same thing with Israel as well, and let them do the job and let them get it done right now, so that way we don't get back into a quagmire in the Middle East, because if it keeps getting out of hand, we are heading toward that pretty certainly, in my opinion. We're going to toward a problem that we're not going to be able to reverse, and that the U.S. will ultimately have to get involved in unless we nip it in the bud right now, and I don't really see that happening.
And I see a lot of people saying a whole bunch of interesting things. Joe Farrow actually said Iraq was the biggest U.S. blunder. I would agree with that. And while I'm saying that we should conduct possible armed intervention against Iran, I will say that our armed intervention against Iraq in 2003, in hindsight, was a fairly large mistake. But unlike, and this is something that I want to make very clear, is a distinction in between Iraq and Iran and their situation with that. With Iraq, we had the rumor, and then the intelligence community confirmed the rumor with really no proof that there were weapons of mass destruction being produced in Iraq. Which there was a reason to believe that they may be doing that, but there was really no proof even before the invasion, now we know. And then the invasion occurred, and then we found no proof of any form of weapons of mass destruction sort of production or development. However, in Iran, we know, like, there's no shadow of a doubt, and we've known this for years, and the Iranians have even made treaties with the United States confirming that they are working on nuclear technology, but saying that they're only going to work on it on peaceful means. And that's clearly showing that unlike Iraq, where we believe they had some sort of enriched uranium and were going to make a weapon out of it, Iran actually has some form of uranium enrichment facilities, which they could either use to make nuclear energy, or they could use to make a nuclear weapon. So unlike Iraq, we already have clear proof pretty much by the agreement of that treaty with Iran that they do have enrichment abilities, and they are probably working towards a nuclear weapon. And they've even started to allude at that themselves, that they are getting really close to having a nuclear weapon. So unlike Iraq, we actually have proof, not only from our intelligence, but from Iran, that they do have the ability to produce enriched nuclear material to be able to make a nuclear weapon. And that is what the difference is, the major one is. Because while it was a blunder to invade Iraq on the misconception that they had an ability to create a nuclear weapon, Iran actually has the ability to create a nuclear weapon, and we know that. I would say, and of course a lot of people say we don't want to get tied up in the Middle East, and I would agree with that completely. Here's what we should do. Because here was the problem with Iraq and Afghanistan. With Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States invaded, and we installed a template of a government that was very, very similar to the United States government. which is impossible to do. Like there are reasons why that cannot happen. America has a very specific kind of history, background, and culture that led to the specific and very unique creation of the democracy or the federal republic system that we have inside the United States. That kind of a system cannot be translated and applied perfectly on any country anywhere in the world, much like any other government model can't be perfectly transplanted from, say, China and then just implanted onto America. The governmental system just will not work because there isn't a sufficient form of a culture or something along those lines to make it work. The Middle East is not a country where a federal republic system can work. There is no system, no governmental system within the entire Middle East except for Turkey, which is a very special exception, that runs off of some sort of a federal republic system. So going off of that, the United States needs to invade with the concept the government that will come out of Iran after we overthrow the Islamic Republic will not be a federal republic system just like America's, and that should not be our goal going in. If we go in, we should pretty much create a sandbox mode for the Iranian people. We should say, y'all are going to pretty much build a government from the ground up that y'all want. The only thing that we require is that it is a self-determining government of a sort. It can be a parliamentary government. It can be a presidential republic. It might end up being a federal republic, but we're not going to limit them on the kind of self-determining government that they're going to have. They can have any kind that they want. But as long as they end up creating one, and it actually has the backing and support of the people, and it is a strong government, unlike the one we installed in Afghanistan, which was very weak because implementing a attempt at a federal republic system just didn't work. And it was very clear when we started withdrawal in 2021, it never was going to work. In Iraq, it's a fairly weak government, but it does work a little bit because Iraq has at least the cultural constructs to be able to support a government like that at least a little bit, but not even all the way. But still, with Iran, we need to see them actually have some sort of a viable government that will work for them and not work in the eyes of America, but it will work specifically for Iran. Because that means that we can be there for a much shorter time. Iran will become stable enough that they'll be able to run their own country, and we'll be able to ensure it's a Western-aligned government and leave them back to their own affairs, but as a self-determining government, unlike the one they have right now, which is a dictatorship. And so, with that, I hope that does kind of give an idea for everyone about how I would try and approach it and make it a bit more of a short-term situation instead of a long-term situation. And also, there can be no waffling. The reason why Iraq went so badly, and then groups like ISIS popped up in the future, is because the United States didn't drop off the large amount of forces in Iraq that was needed. It was assumed that there would need to be a minimum of about 600,000 U.S. soldiers in Iraq at any given time to actually hold it down and to make sure that lawlessness and chaos didn't begin to pop up all across Iraq and then end up plaguing the nation and the rest of the region for decades after. We did not ever do that. We only ended up putting in, I think it was about 400,000 U.S. soldiers at the most, and that number was quickly reduced post-invasion in 2005 to around, I believe it was 300,000 or 250,000, which is an incredibly small number, is a third of what was required based off of the Department of Defense's simulations and modelings on how in the world they could hold down the country and ensure order while an interim government was being created. They did not do that, which is what allowed the Mujahideen, well, not the Mujahideen, sorry, we're actually talking about the Fedayeen. They all end up sounding similar, but that is what allowed the Fedayeen, which was an incredibly radicalized Ba'athist faction of the Iraqi armed forces, to be able to raid Iraqi military stockpiles, gather up a large amount of arms and equipment, and then end up fighting that insurgent war that we saw in Iraq until U.S. forces withdrew in 2011 and 2012. That was the entire reason that happened. If the United States had just fully committed, like we should have from day one, the Fedayeen would have never been able to arm themselves and arm further groups like ISIS in the future to be able to continue on some form of resistance inside of that area. And we would have been able to once again cut off another loose end and keep things nice and tidy inside the area. So I hope that also gives an idea about, you know, why you can't just half commit to things like this. You have to fully commit, because if you do not fully commit, you end up dealing with unmitigated disasters down the road, and it ends up being a never-ending problem. And everyone wants to walk away from it, but we can't, because we're still trying to fix all of the problems that we created by only half committing at the start. And so I hope that addresses that well. This is a tricky situation. A lot of people are, of course, talking about it. It is a really tricky situation, but we still have loads of news to cover. And I just noticed that we're about an hour and 20 minutes into this stream, and we still have a lot of Ukraine war news to cover. And so we're actually going to be moving up into this area and covering that news right now. Also, really quickly, a huge shout out to everyone for raising $3.6 thousand on tonight's fundraiser. Absolutely insane. I gotta say, really cool to see. And also, a lot of people are saying, and this is another interesting one. Before we move on to the Ukraine war news, a lot of people are wondering, will the U.S. be dragged into another forever war if Israel isn't allowed to eliminate the Iranian-backed proxies within the Gaza Strip and also within southern Lebanon? And a lot of people have been talking about this, and it looks like a lot of people are in consensus on one general idea. And Matthew, what is that idea, and what are you thinking about it?
So 53% of the audience said it would lead to another war if Israel is not allowed to eliminate the Iranian proxies, while 20% said probably, but probably not, but possible. Excuse me. And 16% said no, the U.S. won't be back in the Middle East. And on this one, I'm with the 54%. I think that if Israel is not allowed to finish the job right now and get rid of the Iranian proxies, which are a plague on the Middle East, then that will certainly eventually drag the U.S. back into the Middle East to eventually deal with a problem that's going to get much larger if it isn't addressed right now, because Iran is going to keep supporting these groups and also growing them even larger and larger until Iran, along with the proxies, have the ability, with nuclear weapons on top of that, to actually destroy Israel, which will drag the U.S. back into the Middle East. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, in my opinion, it probably will lead to a new conflict in the area. It just will. I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole on this because I told y'all we were getting into the Ukraine war news. Trust me, bro, on this one, it would. I could go into the massive rabbit hole as to why. I'm sure many people would see where I'm coming from with that if I did. But I know that all of y'all have heard me rabbit hole enough already on how to deal with Iran and the possible ways we could go about that. So I don't want to burden y'all too much with talking about how another war could begin that we have to get involved in the area because of the proxies that are supported by Iran. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And now it is time for the Ukraine war news. And that actually brings us to Mali in Western Africa. That is actually probably like the craziest transition we've ever done for the Ukraine war news, man. It's like, we're moving on to Ukraine, which is actually now in Mali in Western Africa near Timbuktu. Literally, Timbuktu is like right there. Have y'all ever seen Timbuktu? Like, really, everyone's heard of the town. It's an actual town, though, out there in the middle of the desert. It is real. It's actually crazy that it's real. But let me see here. I think y'all can actually see something interesting here of Timbuktu. I believe this is it. Nope, that's not it. Where the hell is it? Okay, anyways, sadly I can't find it right now. We might be able to find it a little bit later. But Timbuktu is that famous city of medieval legend, or really the saying, oh, where the hell did you go, Timbuktu? This is where Timbuktu is, no joke. It's actually in the area of northwestern Mali. But anyways, near to that area of northwestern Mali, a whole bunch of Wagner guys got smoked, and it was crazy. It was an actual massacre. A Russian military war blogger ended up dying in the attack. The Mali Alliance forces ended up wiping out pretty much the entire convoy. They ended up taking out the leader, the new leader of the Wagner, after Prigozhin died. They pretty much wiped out everyone who mattered that was affiliated with the Wagner in this one attack. And when you see the convoy burning right there.
Poor bastards can't catch a break. The Wagner's just been decimated at this point.
I mean, it's crazy. It really is. I can't even show y'all any other video rather than this one because every other one, they pretty much just piled all the bodies up into a big group of the Wagner guys, and it was about 80 of them. I mean, it was a massacre pretty much. These guys got ambushed. They didn't even see what was coming. They got wiped out. And that was about the end of it. The leader of the Wagner was in the group, and also some military blogger guy was in the group too, but I forgot his exact name. But anyways, I
really doubt that Prigozhin ever thought that in his entire time that he was in charge of Wagner, that the entire thing would ultimately be decimated in Mali. After all the stuff he had done, like trying to get to Moscow and getting pretty close to it, and also having such a very powerful PMC. And while it was pretty incompetent, they were a little bit more competent than the Russian military, and it's meeting a very, very tough demise right here, especially after his death.
Yeah, really. I mean, like, it's crazy. And also, we got to see some of these pictures as well associated with the area around the attack. And what is very interesting is this guy is wearing a Ukrainian trident, and we are assuming at this point that Ukrainian special forces may have been involved in this ambush, at least in a very, very small form, and may have been responsible for the death of the next Wagner leader after Yevgeny Prigozhin, and also the death of the Russian military blogger. Very big news, and that's actually how this ties into the Ukraine war news segment. Moving on from that and out of Mali and now into the area of Russia, we were able to see just south of Nizhny Novgorod near Kostovo an attack on a Russian oil refinery. Take a look at this. That Liudi drone slammed into Lukoil, baby! And there's the oil refinery over there. It's about to blow up. And there goes the Liudi. We know it already blew up. Here comes the sound wave. There we go. And where's the smoke? Oh, right there! Dead on! And so they hit another oil refinery, hopefully knocking it out and setting it on fire, although that's the only clip we have at the moment. Meanwhile, we also got to see that some Ukrainian partisans ended up taking out some pretty high-end helicopters. They ended up taking out an Mi-28 Havoc, which is actually pretty cool. Let me show y'all this. Here is an Mi-28 Havoc. Probably none of y'all have ever even seen this helicopter in the war in Ukraine, and that's because they're so expensive and so rare. They're very rarely used, a lot like the T-90M was initially at the beginning of the war, but now the T-90M is used a decent amount more because they're upgrading and refitting a decent amount of their tanks to be T-90Ms. But beyond that, one of these was destroyed. A Ka-22B was destroyed as well, and I'll show y'all a picture of that. I'm sure y'all are going to love this. Let me just go type in a Ka-22. This thing.
Oh.
Pretty ugly. But according to what they say, one of these was actually knocked out. They are vintage, and then an Mi-8 was also knocked out as well. But here's their partisan attack followed by classical piano. That is like 4 times speed. But we can see that the partisans did get that little nice burning going, that little fire going, and they cooking them. And JD Macca said, ew! Yeah, the Mi-28 isn't really that great looking. It looks like it has a little snout on the front of it, like it goes up to its targets and goes, the Amerikanski blade, or something like that, and then it like tries to launch a missile at him. But anyways, moving on from that, really nice to see. And moving on up into St. Petersburg, some of y'all may not know this, but today was Fleet Day in Russia. Can we give it up for Fleet Day, Matthew? Hey! It's Fleet Day!
Fleet Day.
And
they
it's
got the fleet. They're bringing out the whole tugboats and dinghies.
Dude, it's Fleet Day. It's where they bring out the Russian Navy in St. Petersburg, and they celebrate the Russian Navy, the Navy that protects their seas. And here is some of it right here at Kronstadt. Man, they got that Kronstadt up in this beat. But beyond that, we can actually see some of their service vessels here. These usually would be involved in the parade, but due to security concerns, because their Navy is so grand and so great it is worth celebrating, they decided for security concerns that it's not that grand and great to be able to defend itself around the parade, and so the actual Navy parade part of it was actually canceled. And so, let me read y'all that. Although celebrations take place all over Russia, the main event takes place in St. Petersburg, with Russian vessels parading along the Neva River to Kronstadt Naval Base. This year, however, reporting indicates that the Kronstadt element of the parade, which should be taking place on the 20th of July, 2024, which was today, has been canceled, citing security concerns. We then got to see that the parade still went on, though, with some boats, at least on the Neva. They didn't actually have the parade or the procession, though. And we got to see Putin receiving a very nice salute from the guys on board the vessels, the great guys in the Russian Navy. Check it out.
Здравствуйте, моряки! Поздравляю вас с участием в праздновании военно-морского флота России.
Man, I'm telling you, man, that's so inspiring right there. I feel like this guy is actually trying to rally a people, maybe under a fascist ideology. I wonder if he is. Oh my goodness!
Oh,
Geschickt Alignment in Deutschland, Volk! Like, oh my goodness! What is
They're
that?
harkening back to an era that's long gone. Now thought we would never see again, but look at that. The Russians are right there doing it.
Man, I'm telling you what, man, that is crazy. That is nuts. Oh my god! Oh,
They did even the thing.
They did the
thing.
thing!
They reeled back and went, oh.
Look at that, dude.
Корабля в ответ на приветствие президента Российской Федерации.
Oh my god. Now that actually is the what is it? The Sieg Heil? That is that.
Oh my goodness, the only thing is that their hand isn't extended like at a knife edge. It's kind of like a fist, but that looks a lot to me like a Sieg Heil. I don't know about y'all, but that really does look a little Nazi. Like, that's very on the nose if it is supposedly not supposed to be Nazi. Pretty dead on.
Выполняет церемониальное
Oh, they did it again!
движение Тинь-Джай,
Oh my god!
чем символизирует огромное уважение к
Oh.
человеку.
Oh my
Экипаж
goodness.
поднимает правую руку перед телом и произносит приветствие. Да здравствует российский военно-морской флот. Команда повторяется 3 раза.
That's the end of the clip, but I think y'all are getting the idea now that this Navy Day thing looked a little Nazi. But moving on from that and out of the area, we're now going to be moving on down into the area around Oriel, and specifically around the little city of Glasnonovka, where we got to see that the Ukrainian drones actually ended up hitting some local substations and knocking out power.
Еще летит, пацаны. Я хуй
Еще,
знает,
еще,
это
еще.
четвертка. Гондоны ебашут просто. Сейчас. Он прям над нами, слышь, он походу.
Oh, you hear the drone.
Квадрат, суки. Делай. Бля, вот он.
Oh, блядь. Oh, went right
Сука,
over my head,
ебать.
блядь. What's going
Он
on
на
out
ЖД,
here?
на ЖД, слышь? Охуеть.
Охуеть.
Просто.
Oh, come on.
Бам. Ща будет. Ёбаный в рот.
He called it, dude. He said,
Yo!
bomb. Dude, listen to him. He said, bomb, and then it blew up.
Бам. Ща будет.
He said, bomb, and then it blew up. Oh, yeah.
Ёбаный в рот.
I love it. But anyways, nice to see the Ukrainians hitting Russian targets. Moving on from that and down into Kursk, we also got to see that the Ukrainians set some oil depots on fire inside the city. Chestnuts roasting on an open fire. And they are burning. That's the end of that clip right there. Nice to see. But moving on from that and into Ukraine itself, we also got to see a whole bunch of interesting news from in here. And we got to see some Ukrainian troops in training. Because, hey, while they are openly running into manpower shortages in Ukraine, by the way, I do want to say that because even Oleksandr Syrsky has made comment that Ukraine is having a decent amount of manpower shortages. They're just not able to conscript enough people into the armed forces anymore. They still are bringing some into training, and here's one of those groups right here. They look motivated.
They are ready to go. Fresh troops.
Man, they're just wandering on along, having a great time. Look at them. I mean, they really are having the funnest of times. That guy just has like a straight up AKM. I like it though. That looks a lot like the one we have, Matthew, the AKM. Like, I respect that. But moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see the Russians showing off a brand new turtle tank. Check this out. This is the latest oh my lord. This is the latest modification of the turtle tank, and I'm just going to turn that down. Man, they got the mine roller on it and everything.
This turtle tank's got some mods. I'm telling you, it's so nice now.
Man, I'm telling you. And let's read these subtitles. Tank combat conditions are constantly changing during the special military operation, and tanks are constantly being upgraded. Originally, this was a T-80 BVM, the latest modification of the most famous Soviet gas turbine tank. There is already a device here, which is popular, called Mongol. This is the factory part of the Mongol visor above the turret with ERA tiles. The front visor is already expanded with a steel mesh. This is the work of Frontline craftsmen. And the outside, the entire structure is covered with so-called Tsar Mongol. So they actually named this stuff. They call it Mangle. And I'm guessing it's because everyone who rides into battle on this thing comes out mangled. This is already a pure SMO invention, which appeared for the first time in the 5th Brigade of the 1st Corps and is now being distributed to the troops. A miracle of engineering. This vehicle belongs to the 40th Marine Brigade of the Pacific Fleet, the tank battalion of Major Kurbanov, one of the most famous Russian tankers. At the back, you can see that the sides are closed with bars. These are sharp bars. The steel sheets are deployed horizontally to deform the cumulative charge if it hits them. Covered with steel chains in front were free space needed to ensure the operation of the tank gun, respectively only chains, that is, through which the gun can pass even. And also, in case of massive minefield, tank is equipped with a skating mine trawl with additional magnetic field generators, which is also protected from the magnetic mines. Now, this is an example of the most, let's say, modern assault tank modification that is used in direct combat. It's a feat.
That looks real modern to me. Looks real advanced, like something that Raytheon might come up with.
Man, it is that copyrighted music is a feat of modern engineering, and we can see it rolling on along. It is a hero. Such a vehicle has the task of making the passage easy, leading a column to the landing site. For assaulting a certain area, village, forest planting. The targets were mainly enemy support forces and enemy manpower. That's usually what you target in a war. We can see them on the way in the video. We can see them firing with the Mongol. Or Mangle, as I call it. And we can see them showing a badass montage of this Russian tank crew really giving it to the Ukrainians. Zaradana! Ura! In a second, y'all are about to see the caveat to that. The pride of Russia, forever no more. But when you see them firing on the Ukrainians here, I mean, uh-oh.
Oh, no. The modern tank, the tank designed by the top Russian engineers, is no longer. It's on fire and it's burning. Those mods really worked out really good.
What happened to those chains? What happened to the chains? Like, what did it protect the tank? It looked like it flew right into the engine bay, apparently hit the engine and caught it on fire. So I guess the pride of Russia is no longer Rodno, which means kind of like people, or Rodnoi. What the hell does that mean? Hang on.
It means destroyed trash tank that's no longer going to roll.
1 second. Rodnoi in Russian. What does that mean? What does it mean? Native. It means native. Well, that shit ain't native. And it certainly doesn't look it. But anyways, moving on from that clip, y'all can see the pride of Russia no more. And we can now see that the Russians are adding Contact 1 ERA to more tanks. They are tiling this crap on an insane amount. What's even crazier, now you can see all of the ERA tiles they have here. They put one singular ERA block right above the driver's view slit. Why? Like if that blows up on top of the view slit right there, y'all know what's going to happen. It's literally just going to crush in the view slit where the driver can't see anything anymore. So why put it there? Like, that's stupid. You know what I mean? Like, that is actually dumb.
That's pretty dumb.
That is pretty dumb. And moving on from that, it is time for us to move on into our casualty report. And the casualties are looking juiced today. Juicing. Oh, what?
Oh my God. 0 Bobcats, man. What the hell happened? 0 Bobcats? How's this possible?
It's a tragedy. It's incredible, unfortunately. But 1,180 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours. Excuse me, really quickly. I have to go into turbo mode really quickly to get through this casualty report because we have to make sure to get into the frontline news. But 21 APCs destroyed, 72 supply trucks also knocked out, along with 13 main battle tanks, 51 artillery pits, 30 drones, 2 MOSs, 2 cruise missiles, 1 anti-air warfare system, and no Bobcat skid steers. But all in all, today was an incredibly good day. It's once again showing us that the Ukrainian armed forces are effecting a very good defense against the Russian Federation's armed forces. They're making sure to once again hold the lines and also make sure the Russians pay dearly for any advances that they may be able to make anywhere along the front lines. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on out of our location unknowns and on into the area of Lukiansi. What do we got to see? The 82nd Airborne, looking fly as hell with those red berets, all of their ARs, and a nice Cougar. Not the person, but the MRAP back there, right behind them.
I don't see a Cougar. Where's one?
Right back there. It's right there.
That looks like a truck.
It's right behind this guy who actually looks oddly British.
Oh, hello, Governor. I have a Cougar standing behind me. Terrible.
No, man, you know what he looks like? He looks like he's about to say, soap! Soap! He looks like Price or something like that for Call of Duty, man. No joke.
Kind of does.
Man, he's about to like punch you down the stairs and say, "How did you know Makarov?" or something like that. But still, I like to see it. Really neat to see them, and just wonderful stuff, beautiful stuff. Moving on from that and into the area around Old-Surtshevy, we got to see the 3rd Brigade attacking some Russians over here. Oh, got him.
That guy wasn't even trying. He just walked right into it. Oh, look, somebody got their direct TV taken out.
Man, someone said, "You effing hillbillies need some mic control. Want to slap you dumbasses when you're young." I'm like, I'll tell you something. Why don't you try and come it out? Why don't you come and try that out? And also...
Wait a minute, what? What did you say?
Man, what?
What did you say the first time?
I screwed up. I had a Bushism right there. But also he wouldn't be able to do that either, technically. But beyond that, why don't you come down here and try that? And also, why don't you tell your mother to have a little bit more control, just in general? Why don't you? But anyways, we can see them blasting the Russians right there in the 3rd Brigade. Beautiful to see. And that is one slip up for the ages right there, Matthew. That really was. That was one of those slip ups we're not going to live down. But moving on from that. We also got to see the Russians getting blown up in the aggregate plant again. And we see here the massive bomb.
What's that thing?
It's a bomb. it's a bomb.
That thing on the top right? What's it in the tinfoil?
Yes, and you can see them moving the bomb down there into the aggregate facility. It's about to blow. Yar, she about to blow. Any second now. It's still rolling around. They're just getting it in place.
It's creeping.
It's just kind of bouncing around.
Yeah. Why is it jittering like that?
Man, it's a little
nervous. Not good when your bombs jitter. It's not good when they do that. Like, you don't want your bombs, like, moving around like that.
Man, the bomb is just a little nervous. It's just like, gee, fellas, I've never done this before. But it's about to blow up finally. And here's the aggregate plant. Oh my goodness. And that took about a quarter of the aggregate facility, from what we could tell. Man. That's something. Someone said, man, I love the reporting, but the yelling is killing my ears. We do need to find some way to volume control that so that way it maxes out at some point and we don't end up like deafening people. But we've never found out how to do that yet, to be entirely honest. And we want to keep up some good high energy.
If you don't like it, then turn off your station.
Man, I'm telling you, it's been like this for 886 days, truth be told. You just kind of got to get used to our ear-shrieking screams. But still, people like them. Don't y'all? But moving on from that and down into the area of Svatove, we also got to see a Russian base getting destroyed down here. Here's the Russian base before. Here's the Russian base after. It was clearly destroyed. Moving on from that and down to the area around Avdiivka, we also got to see the Russians trying to deploy a new kind of defense near their roads. It's fishing wire. It should protect them. I can't tell if that's a lawnmower or a drone somewhere out there, but we can see the fishing wire. The Russian is clearly showing it off. Okay, maybe not a drone.
Пидорасы, блядь! О, блядь.
Ah!
That's
like
hot dog man when the bees get on the tears.
Man, that's what Hot Dog Man sounds like when he loses another sub. He opens up his control room and he goes, ah, something like that.
Сука.
Oh, suka bliad.
Suka bliad.
Almost casually died, suka bliad.
That's what Hot Dog Man right there, Matthew, sounds like after a long day of a romp in the woods. He's going, Or something like that.
They're
Come
so
on,
exhausted
Hogan!
bumping up those woods.
Man, just frolicking out there, you know what I mean?
Господи, рядом все.
Oh no, they're getting pounded.
Vlad and his boys were up on their tiny post, and they were getting pounded.
And then add that noise in with it, and it's just terrible. Just terrible.
Ah!
All these Russians, I'm telling you what, context is
Стреляли
needed.
пидорасы, блядь.
Dude, a Russian gets hit by shrapnel instead of going ah or something like that. They go ah. It's just like, no, watch it, pal. It's like that's not what you're supposed to do.
На багажник.
They finally made it to the
Молока
water.
чуть.
This guy needs to stop. This guy really needs to stop. Let me just get forward a little bit.
У тебя рука еще, блядь. А?
I like how they were so concerned about drones they forgot about artillery, because they were like, look, we set up this fishing net, it protects us from the drones, and then an artillery shell falls on their side and the shrapnel goes everywhere. It's like, I guess you didn't consider that,
Yo,
did
блядь.
you?
Мочина, сейчас. Слышь, что? Там сколько еще? 300? Есть еще 300? Тяжелые?
We're gonna skip forward a little bit more. We can see him wandering along again. We now
Sounds
hear
like
the
voices of the damned out there in the forest is yelling.
number chester, number or something like that. It's like, what the hell?
You go.
It's like the yelling.
You go. Run for your life.
It's
It's
like-
not going to end well for you, good sir. Go.
Dude, nah, man. What you're actually hearing is, and then out in the distance, it's P Diddy and I like to party. And then you go, oh, we gotta
You have to
run.
tell them no, Bliat. Tell them no immediately, or they're going to get you pounded.
Man, from the people who brought you Slender Man comes comes Diddy. Like, run from Diddy, man. Diddy
Да,
man be
я там,
diddling.
блядь,
And
кровь
it ain't some you want. But that's the end of that clip. It looks like the Russians are having fun times. Ah! But moving on from that and into Solidar, we also got to see a Russian trying to shoot down a drone he thought was coming for him, but it ended up actually blowing up on a Buhanka in front of him. So you can see the drone right up there. He's like, Bliat, let me finally load my rifle. Let me try and shoot it. It's like, shit, he's getting kind of close. I like how this goofy man started to shoot right into a loaded Buhanka with guys in it. Did you see that, Matthew? Like, he just pretty much aimed into the Buhanka and just started shooting the guys in it, trying to shoot the drone. Watch. Right there. Like, that round clearly went through the back windshield of that Buhanka right there before the drone actually hit it.
Well, if there's a couple of casualties, it's fine. As long as they take out the drone and finish the mission, that's all that counts. Yes, we took out the drone, Bliat, but our brothers in arms, they have taken the fall.
Sounds like the drone is out of the area now. The snap, crackle, and pop. Moving on from that and into our next clip down near Avdiivka, we also got to see a peon firing fire support for Ukrainian forces in the area. Really neat to see. Love to see it. Moving on from that and down to Touretsk, we also got to see some pictures of the ongoing battlefields around Touretsk, which is very interesting. See, once again showing an active battlefield. Down in Avdiivka, we also got to see a destroyed T-72 AV of the Russian Federation's armed forces. Uh-oh, lag alert.
Алексей, приветствую тебя. От всей души хочу тебя поздравить с днем рождения.
Something seems off about this guy. Uh-oh. Oh. Hello?
You sound like a freak. Say something now.
Hello. But I think we're better now.
I think I can hear you now. Yeah, something was happening. It sounded like you were speaking in 5 pixels.
Man, it sounded like that for you too. I heard you. You went. I was like, that's not English, man. Speak English. But here we go, man. Here he is. This guy seems off. That's what I was trying to say. The way he went, like, really rehearsed right there. It's like low energy, but really rehearsed. It's like something seems off about that.
Could this man be being held at gunpoint? Why's he got a fanny pack around his chest?
Man, that's where he keeps his 9, my boy. Like, that's where he keeps the 9.
Man, that's a certified hood classic.
Man, but also, Matthew, notice this guy moves like a spaceship Earth animatronic. Like, look.
Ты делаешь все, чтобы эти, повторю это слово, пейзажи как можно быстрее все из нашей жизни ушли.
His movements are weird.
Как говорится, шляпу перед твоей инициативой.
He's bald! Put the hat back on!
Man, I was like, put my sunglasses on. Damn, I can't see.
Hold up. Hold up. Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Also, why is he wearing like the goth oversized pants, by the way? Like they're a little bit too large.
Hold up, dude. Hold up. I got something good here. Hang on, let me go back here. Oh, hopefully I can line these up together. Dang it. Hold up. Now I got it. Okay, now we can do it. Alright, here we go.
Леха, снимаю, как говорится, шляпу.
Oh, that was dirty. That was dirty.
My eyes! We got Caillou out here in the Russian army. I appreciate him. But beyond that, that's the end of that clip. We're not going to show the rest of it. This is just this guy monologuing in front of a camera. But moving on from that and into Star Mikhailivka, we also got to see a Russian assault column wiped out by the 59th. So check this out. Here's the assault column. I don't know what's up with the meme edits these days.
Oh. Trying to appeal to the youth, you know what I mean? Get them kids involved.
Hey, kids. Yeah, you like war? Oh my lord. That was a pretty substantial explosion.
Ah, now the Charlie Chaplin parade of Russian clowns are going to run away. Oh.
A second explosion. Mr. President, there has been a second explosion. Oh, this is where that BMP got blasted into pieces right here on that anti-tank mine in the road right there. And, oh, wait, it's actually an FPV drone. I'm so sorry, everyone. Correction. And, splat. And it's gone. Oh! Oh, my goodness.
Oh, that was pretty good. Like pieces of metal all over the place. That was a good one.
Like confetti, even. A few
moments later.
Oh, my lord. Okay.
Oh, wow.
I don't know what they're using. They're apparently using small nuclear weapons on these drones to knock out these vehicles, but the 59th, suffice it to say, succeeded in their defensive efforts. Moving on from that, we also got to see the 79th Air Assault Brigade repelling a Russian assault down in the southern front as well. We got to hear that Battlefield 4 music, which YouTube wouldn't like if I played, but we can see that Russian tank get blown up and catch on fire.
Philip Southern said, "Is it better now?"
Oh,
it's not better now for the Russians. It's getting worse by the day. It's just getting terrible. All their stuff's blowing up. They're trying to manufacture equipment as fast as they can, and they can't quite keep up. It's kind of like they're losing.
Man, I'm telling you, man. They are losing for the large part. I mean, they're just not having a good time. Also, I gotta say, man, do you know something else that's not having a good time?
Hot Dog Man?
Absolutely, man. 2.8 thousand views in 2 days. That's pretty rough right there. My goodness.
That's not falling off. That's fell off.
That is gone. That is literally irrelevant at that point. Like, I don't think anyone could disagree with that. But moving on
from that career dropped harder than than Harvey Weinstein's.
Dude, that career dropped off harder than that whole thing with Mr. Beast and that guy. That person's career dropping off. But I gotta say, very interesting. But we can see here some Russians trying to conduct an assault in the area of Robotny. Oh my lord. Eat beep, eat beep, beep. We'll get Matthew back eventually. Am I coming through fine on this? Eat beep, eat beep, beep. We'll get Matthew back a bit. Okay, so I am actually coming through fine. So oh my goodness. This is rough. Hang on, folks. We're going to be right back.
I still hear myself talking.
Oh, there we go. And you're back. Welcome back. Yeah, you're back,
Man,
finally.
I was being tortured. I heard myself talking for a solid 30 seconds straight, and I was like, make it stop.
Man, I'm telling you, make it stop. But we see the Russians going out on their offensive. Eat, or, eat, or, eat, But you see the Russians doing their thing. Matthew, are you there? Oh my goodness. 1 second, folks. We're going to be right back. Hang tight, everyone. We still got news to cover. It's just that I got to fix something. All right, welcome back,
the worms,
the
I
worms,
can't hear the worms,
the worms. But here's the clip. We're back at the clip. Oh, we got that nice music.
Bluto said in the live chat, "You sound like the rapper Roddy Riches, whoever that is. I don't know."
But let's see here. Terrence United said they probably threw the starter video up until they get it fixed. That's actually correct. That we used that starter video just like that in situations like these. And so we can see the Russians here in the tree line getting a very rough time. It's a tough time for them.
Jack Ray said about the hot dog man. Oh man, I've fallen and I can't get up. Man, call that view alert instead of life alert. You need to press that view alert button right now. Ding 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 ding.
Man, you know you got to be doing so bad too when hardly anyone in your channel is watching, so you get like 2.8 thousand views, and you somehow out of that. Hey, that guy's fine. He's just sitting there. Yeah, you know what? Maybe look around a little bit. You know what? Maybe oh, you know what? Maybe another video would be more interesting down further on the line in the area around Veliki Kapani, where we got to see a destroyed Ural. Look at that! Dude, these are the noises I make when I see a rat. I go, it's a rat, like or something like that. But there's the Ural, flipped over and burned. Man, I gotta tell you though, man, like you gotta suck though to only get 2.8 thousand views on a video, and then out of those 2.8 thousand people, 100 of them unsubscribe. Like that's gotta be bad. Like that's That's like, what is that, Matthew? Like, is an actual number? That's like 0.5%. No. It's more than that. It's like 5% of everyone who watches your video unsubscribes. It's like, that is a bad kind of a metric to have. Usually you'd want it to be the other way around, or even larger than that in the other way. But moving on from that and up into Kyiv, we have the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky, and then we're going to be moving into the questions. And so, without further ado, here is the speech.
Real speech.
Long-lasting speech.
Сильно, надзвичайно результативно. Воїни, я дякую вам за вашу стійкість, за вміння знищувати окупанта саме так, як потрібно для збереження України. Дякую кожному солдату, сержанту, офіцеру 25-ї та 95-ї бригад, а також усім іншим нашим бойовим підрозділам, кожному воїну, які на різних ділянках нашого фронту однаково повністю виконують свої бойові завдання і захищають позиції та допомагають побратимам на позиціях поруч. Вкрай складно на Донецьких напрямках і саме на Покровському протягом цих тижнів найбільша кількість російських штурмів, найбільш жорстокі ворожі атаки саме там. Не кожен, хто зупиняє ці російські удари і знищує цей російський ударний потенціал, виконує одну із найважливіших місій в цій війні. Також хочу відзначити сьогодні наших воїнів, які забезпечують українську далекобійність, а саме 9-й департамент ГУР, влучність на дистанції майже 1800 кілометрів від нашого кордону. Дійсно дуже вагомо. Дякую вам за це. Також дякую воїнам Служби безпеки. Говорив сьогодні з Головкомом Сирським щодо наших дій. І зараз, і на найближчу перспективу Україна має силу, щоб досягти своїх цілей. Я вдячний усім, хто своєю силою це забезпечує. Ще одне, сьогодні в Україні згадуємо про наших людей, які були убиті російськими нелюдами в Оленівці. Один із найстрашніших російських злочинів цієї війни. Росія повинна за це відповідати і буде. І немає такого варіанту розвитку подій, за якого вбивці залишаться безкарними. Вічна пам'ять усім нашим людям, які були вбиті окупантом. Слава усім, хто б'ється, хто працює заради нашої держави. Обов'язково захистимо нашу Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 886 of the news of the war. And I gotta say, what a night it's been. So far, 50,000 people have joined us this night to cover this news on the stream. And I gotta thank all of y'all so much once again for watching, so much for enjoying. Because if it wasn't for folks like y'all being here and enjoying the stream, it wouldn't feel worthwhile to be able to run this thing and get to cover it, because all of y'all bring this stream purpose. And not only that, I've got to say a huge shout out to everyone for raising $3,745 on the fundraiser so far. Absolutely incredible. And I gotta say that it is thanks to each and every one of y'all that the Leah Spring Army continues to be pretty much the only community that weekly fundraises in support of nonprofits in Ukraine and tries to help out to have an impact on the kind of news we cover and to try and support Western interests wherever they may be around the world. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are now going to be moving on into the question segment at large. We actually haven't had one the entire stream, which some of y'all may think was, I just forgot. That was actually a deliberate decision because we were taking so long on the news. I wanted to make sure that we actually got the news out to y'all, and then we got to the questions and had all of our fun after the news was over. All work and no play. But now it is time to play, because we work hard, we play hard. Although we really don't play hard, we just kind of work hard and then kind of sit around until we have to work again. But anyways, Matthew, take it away.
All right, so moving on to our final question segment of the night. We have one poll to address right here, and it says both the Ukraine and Russian militaries are experiencing a stalemate and also logistical issues, and will this force a peace? 59% said no, they will overcome and fight even more, while 17% said yes, peace will be forced upon them, and 11% said, peace is more likely, but not necessarily forced upon them in that sense. So for me, I will say I'm with the 59%. I think both sides will probably overcome this and fight even more, because like the enforcer mentioned earlier, Ukraine is having a bit of a manpower issue right now, but the Russians are having not only a manpower issue, but also an equipment issue in addition to that. So the Russians still have a lot more problems than the Ukrainians have. So I think overall the Ukrainians are in a better shape, but nonetheless, they're both experiencing some issues with their military. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I would have to say the Ukrainians will have to overcome and fight more, I do believe. It seems as though some people are not really into that idea anymore. For some reason, everyone kind of flipped overnight. I would have to say they still have to continue to fight. There's still a lot to be done. There are a lot of Western interests at stake, and not only that, Ukrainian interests as well. And so for that reason, I don't believe that the war is exactly done and over. They need to continue to fight. Even if it is in some form of an attritional war, if the West continues to support them and they remain Western aligned so that way we can support them, then the war could go on for a good while longer, and they could end up winning and prevailing against the Russian Federation in a long war, an incredibly long one. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And Matthew, I understand that we actually have a large amount of top donors tonight. Top donors who have helped this fundraiser to get to the incredible number of $3,759 so far. Before we get on into calling all of y'all out, though, I do have to say I've hardly given enough praise to all of you folks who have done that tonight. Whether we are able to call y'all out here in a minute or not, because we can only call out the donors who put in above $50 to the fundraiser. I think each and every one of y'all, whether it was $1, whether it was $2, whether it was $500, which I believe was the largest one of the night, I've got to thank each and every one of y'all, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all who supported these fundraisers, we wouldn't be able to see this channel support Ukraine and support Western interests like it does. It is truly incredible to see that y'all do this time and time again. Y'all continuously set records. Y'all continuously do incredible things. And for that, we are wildly grateful and appreciative. And thank y'all massively for still having huge hearts and helping out in the best ways you can. And so with that, Matthew, who are the top donors of the night?
All right, so we have quite a lengthy list of top donors, but our biggest one of the night goes to W Samples, who puts in a $500 donation, which is tremendous, and a huge shout out to W Samples for that generosity. And we also had a $350 from Gunfox61, as well as a $333 donation from Hal Rose, and a huge shout out to Gunfox and Hal as well for that generosity. And we also had a $150 from DCC Prime 1, as well as a $125 from Tom S., and then a $100 from some guy called The Enforcer, as well as a $100 from Hal Rose yet again, along with Greg Carrier, Ed Olson, Andy L., and also we had a $54 from Paramecium 13, as well as a $50 from Purple Gerbil, Terrence Custer, William Cullison, Dad Good, Robert Nindell, as well as Steve Watkins at work, and he is still at work. And also we had a $50 from Mike Smith, as well as Purple Gerbil once again. And a huge shout out to everybody that's donated tonight, who's brought us up to $3,759 raised on the fundraiser, which is tremendous to see once again, and I'm very happy to see it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say, a huge shout out to every single one of y'all, the folks we were able to call out, and the folks who weren't able to call out for helping out with this fundraiser tonight. That is absolutely incredible, and once again showing that the Lee Spring Army will never die as we continue to pass fundraiser goal after fundraiser goal, week after week, month after month, year after year, helping out Ukraine and helping out Western interests. And so a huge thanks to y'all once again for supporting that fundraiser. And with that, it is time for us to move on into those live chat questions. And I understand, Matthew, that we have a large number of them, a lot of interesting ones, and not only that, some Morse code decoders of tonight's stream. And so with that, what do we got?
All right, so of course we had the Morse code decoders of the stream, and tonight we had Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Banu, Kevin J, Paul Schultz, and David Millsaps. They said that tonight's Morse code message reads, Israel is starting the groundwork to be able to begin fighting an all-out war. Long live the LSA, Slava Ukraine, Slava LSA, and LSA forever.
And that is the sound of money! And y'all got that dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. I gotta congratulate y'all, really, I do, for getting that live check right. It's absolutely incredible that y'all are able to do something like that. I gotta say a huge thanks to y'all once again, and I believe that message does stand true even right now. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right. And also, real quick, I'm not sure if y'all are seeing this or not on Twitter, but down there in Venezuela right now, they're having an election. What's that?
Maduro.
Yes, the guy. But down there in Venezuela, they're having a bit of an issue with their election. And right now, I'm seeing videos coming out right here from Visegrad 24 showing Maduro's gangs going into apparently the polling booths and stealing the boxes full of votes. So this is what happens when communists can't win elections. They start going through and terrorizing everybody and stealing the ballot boxes. Like there's no chance in hell of being able to count the votes right because they're literally stealing the boxes. So that is crazy to see. And I saw someone asking about that earlier. And this is just another case of failed communism if I've ever seen one. So there you go. But Enforcer, are you seeing these videos? It's crazy to see. Like they're literally running in like with motorcycle helmets on, stealing the ballot boxes.
I have seen him, Matthew. I have seen him, and I would have to say this is that normal commie business that you see in a communist country. I mean, or a fascist country, for example, like with the Russian Federation. It is that kind of normal commie thug business that you see from thug leaders. And Maduro is no doubt a thug leader, 100%. Classical commie by all measures. And it appears that they are pulling out the classical communist moves to try and maintain power in the country. I would say terrible thing to happen to Venezuela. It's a very terrible thing because nowadays Venezuela is actually viewed hostilely by most Americans. But what is so sad about that is that Venezuela was actually a very prosperous country for a very long time in South America and quite stable as well. And it's sad to see that all of that was pretty much thrown to the wayside since 2013 by Maduro and his gang of communists who have taken over the country and have ended up running it as a thuggish, brutish hellhole. Much like many countries that fall to some form of authoritarianism end up succumbing to. Whether it be communism or fascism, all of them end up a lot like this. And it's terrible to see this reigning over Venezuela still at this moment. But also, if y'all want to see something... Go ahead.
That guy said, I can't win the election. It looks like he lost quite badly, actually, from the numbers I'm seeing coming in. It looks like he lost in a landslide. He said, if I can't win the election, I'm going to go steal the ballot boxes from everywhere and just toss out the bad votes. That's insane. Like, just see these guys pulling up on motorcycles to each and every polling center and stealing the boxes. That's literally like going in on foot and deciding to take matters into your own hands because you lost an election so bad. Like, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite this bad when it comes to something like this. It's just like the videos coming out are just unbelievable. Like, and for a long time, people have known that this guy is a thug and he's running Venezuela into the ground. But here he is. He can't give it up. He's going to try to stay there and fight for it.
And I would have to say it's crazy to see, man. It really is. You would think that some people would get involved eventually, especially if this turns into some sort of a crazy coup attempt or something like that by Maduro to try and maintain his power. You would think that there would possibly be some sort of American military intervention in a very, very small form to try and support the opposition to Maduro, because it's quite clear that the people don't like him. He's a very unpopular figure in Venezuela, like from what we're already hearing tonight. And not only that, the guy is running his nation as a dictator. It is in the Americas, and by the Monroe Doctrine, which is kind of silly, I'm not going to lie, but the Monroe Doctrine claims that we're able to deal in affairs of other countries within the Americas, but no external powers can. I would say, why don't we go down there and try and help out the Venezuelan people? Because I know this, there's going to be no massive repercussions that would come from us helping out. There can only be good things coming for America and Venezuela, because it would reopen trade with the Venezuelans to America, and not only that, it would hopefully return some economic prosperity to a very economically downtrodden and poverty-ridden country because of the past 11 years of Maduro's leadership. I don't really think that's too controversial. It's kind of like asking for the removal of Putin from Russia. I would say the removal of Maduro from Venezuela would be along pretty much those same lines of trying to get rid of some sort of a brutish dictator leading this nation. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And also people are like, damn, because I know this, damn, you're a warmonger. And I like how some people say that, Matthew, when I say things like we should conduct armed intervention, possibly in a limited form, to overthrow Maduro and allow the Venezuelan government to return back to the way it was. I like how people will say, wow, you're a warmonger. But some of those same people will sit there and go, NATO should go to war with Russia. It's like, how in the world can you just call me a warmonger? It's like I'm just saying let's use a little bit of our muscle to do the right thing in the world, and then other people try and arbitrarily say that some of it's warmongering and some of it isn't. I'm just saying we ought to do what's right, and I believe that not a lot of Venezuelans would disagree with what we would be doing down there if we did. But anyways,
I don't know. I think you got to pick and choose your fights carefully, because while there are a lot of places around the world that do probably need intervention by the United States, we can't take on too much stuff at one time. For example, we're already taking on Ukraine. We're taking on the Israel situation as well. Also, we potentially have to take on the Taiwan situation if that breaks out. So we can't get too stretched too thin. And while I do sympathize with the Venezuelan people on this one, I'm not sure if going down there and trying to step in and intervene would be a good idea, because that might be taking on one extra fight that we really don't need to take on, because the Venezuelan people have to stand up for themselves at some point and say, we've had enough. Maduro ran their country into the ground and absolutely destroyed the place. So, me personally, I think it's on them to fix that. It's their country.
Me personally, I would say, let's go down there, send about maybe a brigade in to help out a uprising against the Venezuelan government, overthrown, because South American coups and Central American coups never require like a Middle East level of manpower. I mean, we've done them in the past and they've been incredibly easy to do. Conduct an overthrow against Maduro, and then we leave. Like that one, the South America is stable enough that we could actually just leave right after Maduro was overthrown and then just let the Venezuelans figure it out from there. So we wouldn't have to get involved in some kind of a long, drawn-out thing where we're sitting down there forever trying to fix things. We could just go down there, overthrow the guy, tell them, okay, y'all are on your own, good luck, and then leave. And they will probably end up picking a leader that isn't Maduro again. I think they probably learned their lesson pretty well from Maduro, that he's not a good kind of a person to pick. Communism isn't really a good option, even in the modern world. Although communism failed every time, it won't fail this time. And that's what the old saying's always been. But I think the Venezuelans learned that it will fail every time, and I don't think they're going to be voting for anything like that again. So, yeah, I think I don't really see anything too wrong with doing that, because it wouldn't be stretched too thin, and also it would be a nice little stepping stone, because it would be a small little event, a very short, drawn-out event for the United States, maybe over the course of a month or a few months. And then we also start sending a message to the world that America is back in business, and we're not going to be, lightly treading around when we don't really need to. It's like, what is Venezuela going to do? Like, what are they really going to do? They're going to shoot a foul at us? It's like, come on, please. It's like, that's silly. They're not going to do that. They would rather run before they dealt with facing the American military on Venezuela's shores or in support of some sort of an uprising. They'd probably join it. But with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And with that, also, someone said a domestic political. I'm so sorry. I cannot weigh in on that. I can only weigh in on foreign policy and pro-Western matters. I'm very sorry about that. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so moving on here to our first live chat question. We have one from Draconia. He says, can't Turkey call Article 5 if Israel retaliates and fights Turkey, thus making the whole thing a big fiasco?
Technically they probably could, but it would not stand up too well, considering that Turkey was actually a open belligerent, because right now they're threatening war with Israel. And so if they go to war with someone and then they get attacked, I don't think they have Article 5 protections, because they openly ended up becoming a belligerent against someone, and then they got attacked as a response, which isn't really a defensive measure at that point. That's an offensive measure, and joining their war in an offensive means. So I would have to say probably not, from what I understand, but there's a chance that they could try and interpret it that way and try and push the discussion into the halls of the NATO headquarters in Brussels. And so I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and this one goes to Anonymouse, who says, what sort of situation or event needs to take place to draw the U.S. into a war in the Middle East? And that's a good question, Anonymouse, because I actually put up a poll about that, I think, earlier. And also, I did mention it as well. I said, where's the red line in the Middle East for the United States? And right now, I don't think there really is one. And there should be a red line. There needs to be one. So hopefully we can get that figured out soon. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, at the moment, given how things currently go, nothing would probably draw us into a war in the Middle East. But when we're talking realistically, I would say the death of the U.S. service members at Tower 52 would have drawn us into a war. Because it took a lot less in the day for us to get drawn into a war, and that would have drawn us into a war, and then it didn't. So I would say at the moment, nothing could draw us into a war, but if anything, the deaths of U.S. service members in the Middle East would draw us into a new war if it did happen, but it really didn't. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And also, some people are saying, because I see this a lot, and have seen this a lot in the chat, and I have to make sure to make a fair critique here on the political level. People are saying, oh, well, the current guy, he's the one who is weak because Americans are getting killed and he's doing nothing. I would like to remind y'all that to make this quite fair, because it is quite fair if I look at it objectively, the prior guy as well also let U.S. service members get fired on by the Russians and also others in the Middle East, and we got reports of multiples of them being injured so badly, a lot of them got traumatic brain injuries, which are pretty severe, and we still didn't do anything to the Russians or anyone in the area. We just sat back and did nothing. And everyone thought each time that those instances were happening from 2016 to 2020 that there would be some kind of a response, and then there wasn't any response then either. And that's kind of the thing. I'd have to say this very fairly because, of course I don't get into politics, but I can make fair criticisms and praises of both sides at the same time. I don't see the kind of assertiveness that I'm looking for in the Middle East from either side, to be entirely honest. It seems like both sides are incredibly scared of confrontations in the Middle East because they're scared of looking like predecessors who have gone before, who invaded Iraq and Afghanistan and ended up getting the United States drawn into 10 to 20 year long conflicts that really looked like they had no end. That is what a lot of people are scared about. And while that's a reasonable thing to be concerned about, at the same time, we can't sit there and let that paralyze us in the Middle East where everyone can take advantage of the U.S.'s paralyzation and do whatever they want in the area. And so that is something that I have to say I'm quite aggravated with. And a lot of people are saying, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean that you have to go all in. That does mean we have to go all in because of half-assed commitments by everyone, we now have to come in, we have to deal with that kind of a situation where everyone's used to the United States backing off or having half-assed commitments in the Middle East. So even if we tried to ramp up back to what we used to do, it's not going to be enough because people are just going to be going, oh, well, it's just a little show of force. They're really still that weak America underneath that is paralyzed with fear to really do anything in the Middle East, so we're going to keep going. So then you have to go all the way to send the message, we're not a meek little America in the Middle East for some reason. We're America, and you would be best to tread carefully. And then they'll go, okay, now we need to back off because they're actually going to start braining people out here if we don't back off. So that's kind of the way we have to deal with it now. Yes, it's very aggressive. It's not really what I'd want to do, but it's the kind of situation we're being handed right now because of how everything's gone for a while now in that area, and now we have to fix it. So now you have to go pretty much 180 the other direction to try and fix it, or at least get people in a different mindset about how America is going to operate in the Middle East. But with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And also, and I gotta say this because I always see people in the chat disagreeing with me, going, no, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't go all in. All this kind of stuff, saying that it's a warmongering, stuff like that. Listen, this is not what I'd want to do. I'm being entirely honest. If it was my kind of a situation, the Middle East would have never gotten into a scenario like it is right now. We would have put our foot down hard enough and strong enough at the get-go that we would not be seeing anything like has unfolded right now. That would have been how it would have gone. But that's not how it's gone, and I haven't been in charge my entire life. Hell, I wouldn't have been able to. I would have been an infant most of it. But we are now dealing with a situation that has been created largely, in my opinion, by half-assedness of almost everyone who's been involved in the Middle East. It has been the beginning of projects that have never been fully committed to, and because they never were fully committed to, the end product of every single project in the Middle East has been a failure of a sort and has ended up creating more problems than it was supposed to fix. So to be able to deal with that, we now have to go towards the extreme of the other end. We have to deal with the Iranians very aggressively, pretty much with open hostilities, and we also have to allow Western aligned nations in the area to be able to deal with Iranian-backed proxies with open hostilities that will appear to be incredibly violent, possibly even massively escalatory. But at this point, what other options do we have? If we don't stop and turn a 180 at this point and get openly aggressive and openly hostile against these anti-Western forces, they're eventually going to erode the Western aligned nations we have in the area and triumph over us in the long run. So either we turn a 180 and we get very aggressive now, Or we half-ass it and get slightly aggressive, and then they keep going, and then they still end up triumphing. Or we do nothing like we are right now, and then they'll end up triumphing. So there you go. That's how I'm looking at it right now. And so while it's not what I'd want to do, and it's not the kind of situation I'd want us to be in, it is the one we're in, and we kind of have to live with that reality and work with that accordingly. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Mellows, who says, why does Turkey have an issue with Lebanon being invaded by Israel?
Turkey has an issue with Lebanon being invaded by Israel because Turkey is trying to build a small sphere of influence in the region of the Middle East and also in the Balkans, really in the Black Sea and also the Eastern Mediterranean and really the Arabian Peninsula. They're trying to build a sphere of influence in this area, and Lebanon is a part of that. Now, the way that Turkey plans on doing this sphere building in the Middle East is not through economic means like they're doing with Ukraine and the Balkan states, because they don't really share a lot ideologically with those countries. They just share a lot of economic interests with them of trying to prosper. In the Middle East, however, they have to try and come in and economically vie for their attention, and also they have to try and vie ideologically to look like they'll be a leader. I've gone into this in great length before on other streams, but it goes all the way back to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the dissolution of the Islamic Caliphate that existed in the Ottoman Empire, which was pretty much their version of the Pope for the Islamic faith. And so when the Caliphate disappeared, the Islamic world went into this really weird tumble free fall, really up until the 80s, where no one really knew what the Islamic faith was or what kind of leadership there would be in it anymore. And so that's why the Middle East was kind of so peaceful and not really that violent for most of its time up until the 80s. Caveat with that is the Israel situation. That's always just been violent since day one. But beyond that, that's why the Middle East was largely peaceful and not unstable until the 80s. Because with the 80s, finally came the ideas in the Islamic world because of the siege at Mecca, and also a kind of Islamic shift towards trying to return back to traditional Islamic values of things like Sharia law. They then started to implement a form of radicalism in the region, kind of like what I'm saying what America should do in the Middle East as a general, flip a 180 and get really aggressive. The specific group of members of the Islamic faith believed that they flipped a 180 and became very aggressive and hostile about bringing back the kind of traditional ideas, at least in their mind, of Islam, such as Sharia law. They would be able to bring back the kind of order and stability that was seen during the times of the Ottoman Empire's caliphate. And so that's what created kind of the situation we see in Saudi Arabia these days with their laws being very draconian and backwards with like the public beheadings and stuff like that. And also what's led to the formation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is a different religious faction than the Saudis, because it's the Sunnis and the Shiites pretty much fighting together. And I forgot which one the Iranians are. Let me, Sunni Shiite map. Let me go get this. So let's see here. Let's see. Sunni Shia. So the Iranians are the Shias, the Saudis are the Sunnis, and the Iraqis are kind of caught a little bit in the middle, although they're minority Sunni. But beyond that, these are two separate factions. And so the thing is, in this region, and this is what's led to all the fighting, is that while really everyone, at least ideologically, kind of wants to go back to what they believe is traditional Islamic values, because of the two factions, there is no agreement really on which direction is the traditional direction, because the Sunnis and the Shiites, a lot like Protestants and Catholics and the Christian faith, have different ideas on the minutia on how things should be done. And so they ended up, Saudi Arabia and Iran, funding and supporting a whole bunch of proxy forces to fight each other in the region. And that's where all of the instability comes from. And ideology in this region plays a massive factor, because the entire region is pitched right now in this battle of what should the ideological way forward be. Turkey hasn't really ever been involved with that since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, because they took a very French route to government, where religion was pretty much completely forbidden in any government form, and any sort of action supporting or promoting any official religion were completely condemned, up until the modern day with Erdogan. And Erdogan is using that as a tool to try and make Turkey look like it is going to be the leader ideologically of a new Islamic world. It doesn't really have anything to do with actually believing in the ideology. It just has more to do with trying to draw these countries into a Turkish sphere so that way they can sphere build like they're doing in the Balkans. But it's with a different kind of sales pitch for the Middle East than they do with the Balkans. And so Lebanon is a part of that. And Turkey has to be able to present themselves as a new defender of Islamic peoples and the Islamic faith. And so that's where the really tricky parts comes in, because Iran is mostly Shia, and Hezbollah and Hamas are mostly Shia forces. They're not made up of Sunnis. And yet, because Turkey is just trying to generally step in and be protectors of the Islamic people, while these groups are inherently anti-Western, while they are inherently anti-American, they're Islamic peoples. Doesn't matter the sect for Turkey, it just matters that they're Islamic. And they're about to be attacked by a non-Islamic group. And so by Turkey threatening to go to war with Israel, what they're sending as a message to every other Middle Eastern country is, we will defend y'all from non-Islamic peoples, and therefore we can be the leaders of the Islamic ideology going forward, or at least where Islamic ideology will be heading. And that is a sales pitch of a sort, to try and get everyone to pull into their sphere of influence. So that's kind of why they're doing it in a really detailed analysis on an ideological level. And I know a lot of people are like, you know, there's no politics and no religion on this channel, but when we speak about Turkey's sphere building, it's impossible to actually talk about how they're going about that in the Middle East without talking specifically about what kind of ideological lines they're trying to sell to other Middle Eastern countries. Unlike many areas in the world, which are very secular, like most of the Western world, because while the Western world is majority Christian, it's usually secular. Religious arguments and religious talk isn't really brought up in the governments that much, and it doesn't really play a large part in governmental decision making in most situations. Unlike the Middle East, where Islamic decision making and Islamic theology is very important, because unlike the West, which has had really like 2,000 years to sort out the whole secular side of things, the Islamic world is only about 100 years into trying to figure that out at the moment, and it's still very fresh. It's still a massive thing for them, and so for that reason, ideology, at least on a religious level in the Middle East, plays a very big part in how all these countries are interacting with each other. And so that's the best way I can explain it, not to try and get into religion unnecessarily. It's actually necessary in this discussion, but that is kind of why they're threatening to go to war with Israel. And so I hope that makes sense. I hope that does explain that well, and I hope that gives y'all a little bit of an understanding why Turkey would do something that seems that stupid, because from a Turkish perspective it would make sense, but from an American perspective it makes not a damn lick of sense, and from a Western perspective as a whole it goes against their interests and it does not make sense. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
All right, and this one goes to Connor. He says, are you going to cover the Nicolas Maduro using his military to overturn his election loss in Venezuela? And what I can say is I've seen some more news coming out right here. It says that the Venezuela Electoral Commission is now claiming that with 80% of the votes in, Maduro has won a third term, despite all the early polls showing that Maduro is way behind his opposition. And by the way, his opposition apparently has 60% of the exit polls, but yet Maduro has the majority of the votes, winning the presidency. So make that make sense. That makes no sense whatsoever. So, Enforcer, what say you?
Sounds like a crooked election being run by a crooked government to me, and I think that's about all I have to say about that. But with that, I think we're on to the second to last question of the night, if I'm correct, Matthew.
Yes, and this one right here is going to go to, let's see here. This one is going to go to Knox, who says, do you guys think that if Iran gets involved, that it'll trigger a World War III, or is there more on the field to drive into that direction?
Good question. Let me see if I can get that one and read it really quickly. Do you think guys, if Iran gets involved, it will trigger World War III? I don't think it'll trigger World War III per se. It'll get really close like it did with Ukraine, but I think it'll just remain a very large regional war. Not really a good situation, to be honest, but it's one that's probably going to happen, and I would say that it will most likely remain a large regional war, at least in my opinion. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. Also, another thing I just saw really quickly is someone said that there was plenty of religious discrimination here in America. On a person-to-person basis, people may or may not like certain religions in America, but on a federal government level and also on a legal level, it's completely illegal in the United States to discriminate against someone because of their religious background, race, or anything along those lines as far as employment or anything like that. Some other countries don't have laws like that. Some countries in the Middle East don't have laws like that. Like, you can discriminate openly against non-Muslims in some Middle Eastern countries by law. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. In fact, it's kind of encouraged, at least ideologically. But here in America, we do have laws that have been put in place by the federal U.S. government, which means that it's applicable to all U.S. states through, like, the Civil Rights Act of 1965 and things like that, that you can't discriminate upon religious reasons, racial reasons, or anything along those lines. I gotta say that that's actually something pretty impressive, because the Western world is actually really the only place in the world that pioneered that concept first. Like, really nowhere else did. Like, in the Soviet Union, it actually went in the opposite direction. If you weren't an atheist, you couldn't really get any jobs, or really any good jobs. You could get jobs, but they weren't going to be great, and you weren't going to be liking them. And so they actually went in the opposite direction. Instead of being secular and not really discriminating based off of your religious affiliation, they would discriminate against you because you had a religious affiliation. So it pretty much went in the opposite direction. But the Western world actually is the first to have done something like that. And I got to say that that's actually a pretty interesting kind of a, I guess you could say, a historical achievement, because it was the first of its kind ever, really, in history. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Kind of a little interesting side note with that. But with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
All right. I was doing some searching here to find the viewer that's going to have the final question of the night. And I think that viewer is going to be LSA Sergeant Figman.
Hey!
And he says, is it possible that Turkey could have its jets reclaimed by the U.S. if it conducts armed action against Israel?
Sadly, I do not think so. We could, of course, demand them back. The Turks could refuse, but if we wanted to make sure that they couldn't use those F-16s any longer, we could just deny them access to spare parts, and they would eventually run out of spare parts, and those aircraft would end up being pretty much derelict, or they'd have to start cannibalizing others, so that way they can try and keep the few F-16s they will have left flying. We could do that, but I don't think we could directly demand for our aircraft back. At least from what I understand. I would be shocked if we could. I'm not ruling it out because I'm not entirely sure if that is possible or not, but at least from my understanding, it would be very, very hard to pull something like that off without them just straight up refusing, and then we can't really do anything to them unless if we wanted to go into a full-on war with Turkey, which is also a member of NATO, which would make things very, very confusing. But with that, I hope that does address that well, at least the best I can, in my opinion. And I have to thank all of y'all so much once again for watching. 55,000 people have watched this stream from beginning to end. A load of y'all have enjoyed this tonight. And I got to say a huge thanks to you so much once again for supporting this channel and helping us to keep this thing running, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. For us to be able to get to Sunday fundraisers like these, and to be able to raise $3,800, $3,824 exactly for Revive Soldiers of Ukraine. The support that y'all show this channel during the week is incredible and helps us to be able to keep this channel running. The support that y'all show to Ukrainian nonprofits on days like these, on Sunday, is what makes this channel so special and so incredible. Is the amazing community that gathers around every single day to help out these fundraisers on Sundays and to help out and actually have an impact on Ukraine and help folks out. I got to thank y'all all so much once again for being incredibly kind-hearted and doing amazing things tonight. And we will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours, actually the next 48 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. And if a war with Lebanon breaks out, we will, of course, immediately go live and break that news as soon as it happens. If it happens tomorrow, we will do that. If it happens on Tuesday or any other day, we will do that as well. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And with that, thank you all once again for another great stream tonight, and of course, another successful fundraiser, $3,824 raised, which is tremendous to see, and the LSA came through once again. And with that, Slava Ukraine, Heroam Slava. We'll see you all on Tuesday night, and maybe tomorrow as well for the short war video, if that does actually happen, if there's enough news to cover. And also, you'll be seeing me hanging out on the Twitters, looking to see what's going to happen over there in Israel, and like the Enforcer said, if something does break out, we'll immediately be jumping on here on a live stream to cover that as it happens. So with that, thank you all once again, and good night.
this.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its